We will be starting in just a couple of moments. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Provo Municipal Council meeting for this evening. It is just before 5:45 p.m. on Tuesday, February 20th, 2018, and we are met in the City Center Municipal Council chambers at 351 West Center, Provo, Utah. This meeting is being broadcast live on YouTube using the Provo City Council channel, where it will also be available for on-demand viewing. The council requests that citizens help maintain the decorum of the meeting by turning off electronic devices, being respectful to the council and others, and refraining from applauding during the proceedings of the meeting. We will begin with a roll call, and
Cliff Strachan,
Brian Jones,
Dave Sewell, George Handley,
George Stewart,
David Harding,
Dave Knecht, Kay Van Buren,
Michelle Kafusi,
Wayne Parker.
So I am David Harding. I'm the vice chair of the council, and we excuse Mr. Winterton, who is our chair, who is unavailable at this time, but we are hoping he will join us shortly. We will next have an opening prayer, followed by a pledge of allegiance, both given by Mr. Cliff Strachan, the executive director of the council.
our Father, who art in heaven, we are grateful as citizens of this great country and this great city to participate in the governance of the city and consideration of the issues that it faces. We pray, Father, for our council and for our citizens as the council considers the issues and makes their judgments and their determinations. We ask, Father, that thou will always help us to be civil in our discourses. And we ask, Father, for thy blessing on our community, that we might do all we can to make this community safer, better, more prosperous, and continue to be a wonderful place to live and work. And we say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
All right, for the pledge. All rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please sit.
Thank you, Mr. Strachan. We will move to the approval of our minutes up for discussion today. We have the minutes from February 6th. It says 2017. I do believe that's the 2018 council minutes, though. Are there any objections or requested changes? See no objection. I declare the minutes approved by unanimous consent. Item 1 on our agenda is a presentation of the Employee of the Month for February 2018, and this will be presented to us by Mr. Chaz Addis. Addis? Addis.
All right. So yeah, my name's Chaz Addis. I'm the city forester and the president of the Employees Association, and on the behalf of the association, we would like to recognize Karen Walker as Provo City's Employee of the Month for February. And now I would just like to turn the time over to Brian Jones to present the PowerPoint and say a few words about Karen.
stand in the place of honor, or embarrassment, whichever one. So Karen, for those of you who don't know her, Karen works in our front office, and she's been with us for 4 years now. If you can go ahead and go to the, I don't know, let's see, I have control of these, don't I? Maybe. Is this turned on?
Nope. Oh, there you
go. Okay, there we go. Karen's been with our office for about 4 years. This is the city attorney office staff from this year, and most of whom are here to recognize Karen because of her great work. She works in our front office as the executive office assistant. She started as a part-time employee and worked her way up in just a few short years, and is a real pleasure. She is someone that we really enjoy working with. She brings a lot of joy and brightness to the office, and has done some amazing work for us. This slide contains some information about Karen, that she's from American Fork, and she interned at the Provo City Justice Court, is where she got her start with Provo City, and just finished her degree. So we want to congratulate her on that as well. And she has done some amazing work for the past 3 months, I think. She's probably worked just about every weekend on top of her regular job, trying to transition our criminal prosecution software off of the software that we were using before. And she has led our front office team in doing that and done a fantastic job. She also serves as a board member on the Utah Prosecutorial Assistance Association, which is an honor for our office and for Karen. And she serves on a committee that is developing the state's replacement software for what was the previous one called? PIMS, for the previous PIMS software, which is going to be e-prosecutor. So we're excited that she gets to do that. And then those who put together the slides got some good slides for us of Karen enjoying her activities in the city, participating in the fire academy over at the fire station, and bike to work day. And that's Karen's smile. That's what she brings to our office every day, is a cheery attitude and a great smile. And some gun skills when she got to go to the to the police officers virtual training simulator. So the slide says that she's loved working at Provo City, and we certainly hope that that's true for the rest of us in the office, because we have loved having her work at Provo City and hope that she does plan to stay here for many years to come. So.
Congratulations, thank you.
Thank you.
If you come up here, we're going to take a picture.
Okay.
So.
Congratulations again to Ms. Walker, and thank you to Mr. Addis and the rest of our Provo City employees. I hope the residents of Provo appreciate just how well served we are by the many members of our Provo City team. And if we can move to the next slide. There we go. So as indicated now on the screen, a required public hearing will be held for certain agenda items prior to council action. After each such item has been presented, time to comment will be provided to all those who wish to speak. For items that do not require a public hearing, public comment will still be taken following the presentation of the item, but will be limited to 10 minutes. At this time, 15 minutes have been set aside for an open public comment period, which is intended to allow the comment on matters that do not appear on the agenda. Persons who speak during this time to an item that is on the agenda will not normally be afforded a second opportunity to speak during the comment period specific to that item. During any public comment period, each speaker will be generally limited to 2 minutes. Additional time may be given to individuals specifically invited to speak, such as applicants, neighborhood chairs, or others that may be representing additional persons. Please begin your comments by stating your name and city of residence. Due to noticing requirements, no formal action will be taken in this meeting on matters that do not appear on the agenda. And I do want to note that items 6 and 7, due to council rules, are not eligible to be voted upon in this meeting. We will still be taking public comment and may have some discussion, but they will be voted on at a later council meeting. I'd like to welcome Mr. Winterton, Chair Winterton, and we'll turn the meeting over to him.
Thank you. Let's open it for public comment.
Pam Jones, Provo, Edgemont neighborhood. 8 years ago, when Mayor Curtis was in some of his first couple of meetings, he seemed to be confused over some of the terminology that the council was using. And so he kept asking, oh, what does that mean? Or who does that? Where can I go for help on that? And various people on the dais kept saying, oh, ask Wayne, he knows. Or that's Wayne's job. Or go see Wayne. So I made each of them a help, an easy button. Wayne still has his, and so I thought it was time for Mayor Kafusi to get hers. Sorry, the wireless doesn't work between them. It will be put to good use.
Seeing no other comment, we will close the public comment period. And thank you, Wayne, for all you do for us. We will now go to item number 2. We will need to recess as the municipal council, and I'll look for a motion to do that. And reconvene as the redevelopment agency. So moved. Thank you. Those in favor? You're up, Mr. Chair.
Okay. So we will have a presentation by David Walter, our redevelopment director, on a resolution appropriating $284,295 in the new development fund for funding the demolition and construction on Block 90, which is the RC Willey Block.
Thank you, Chair Connect. Good evening, members of the Redevelopment Agency Board. The item is to ask you to consider appropriating an additional $284,000 from the fund balance in Fund 274, which is Redevelopment Agency Fund, to help pay for the continuing costs of the demolition and parking lot construction on the RC Willey Block. In the past, we went out to bid and got asbestos abatement bids, selected a contractor and had it abated, and then turned the construction over to PEG, who then demolished the block and constructed the current parking lot that we're using to meet our obligations with the County Convention Center. Because we had 2 contracts that were hitting the appropriated amount, we inadvertently went over the amount, and so we're requesting an additional $284,000 to finish the project and to move forward. This concludes my presentation. I'm available for any questions.
We spoke earlier in the work meeting about what led to this. One question that I had remaining was, is the city paying more now because of the way things transpired, or is this amount what should have been requested from the beginning? Is there?
I think when we requested it initially, there was funding in there available, and then we had 2 contracts that were hitting it. So in hindsight, I would say probably we should have requested more, but we didn't, because we were moving quicker than we had initially anticipated to put the pavement down, to make the parking lot, to help the county meet some obligations, particularly with the Christmas season, holiday season last year, and trying to get ahead of the asphalt batch closings that we didn't quite connect all the dots that we should have.
Okay, thank you.
So I was asked a question. So we had a particular contractor remove the asbestos, and they gave us a bid up front. And so I guess the question that was asked to me is, if they didn't bid it correctly, we have any recourse on them?
I don't think we're disputing the amount that they bid. I think what we're saying is that because the pavement and demolition also were tied to the same account, that we should have asked for more in the initial. We didn't realize that we would be doing the demolition as quickly as we had wound up doing.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions from the council? And this is one that we do want to get public, open it up to the public. All right, thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
Are there any of the public that would like to come and comment on this item? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the RDA board and see if we have a motion to move forward. Actually, do we need a motion, Brian?
No, although it doesn't say in the notes, by rule, there is an implied motion to approve the resolution.
Okay. Then all in favor, please so indicate, or opposed? All in favor? It's unanimous. Thank you, and looking for a motion to close this portion. Yes.
You've got one more.
Oh, I'm sorry. Item 3, a resolution appropriating $228,670 in the Housing Consortium Fund for funding self-help projects applying to the fiscal year ending June 30th. Dave, we'll have Dave Walter present this.
Thank you. In December of 2016, the Rural Housing Development Corporation returned $150,000 to the RDA as a refund from funds that had been dispersed when they were doing their Nebo Gateway project. I think it's important to note that the funds we're discussing now are federal funds that the city receives through both community development, block grant, and home. We're talking about the home funds right now. When we got those funds, they were processed as a loan, a loan repayment as opposed to a refund. This had the net effect of making the budget unavailable, making those funds unavailable in the budget. And so in February of this year, when Rural Housing submitted a reimbursement request for the $150,000, we found out that that was not available in the budget. It's also important to know that these are not new funds. These are funds that we would have received as a and would have reprogrammed later on, but because haven't been appropriated, it's important for us to come back to the agency board as the administrator of the home dollars on behalf of the city of Provo and ask for those funds to be appropriated. And then additionally, we have $78,000 in home funds that are reserved for the community housing development organizations, or typically our CHODOs. that were allocated to rural housing and that are available but have not yet been appropriated. So again, these are not new dollars, they're dollars that are already in our fund balance but have not been appropriated through the budget process. And so prior to expending those, it's important for us to come back to you and request permission to do that. That concludes my presentation, and I am available for any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We will now open this up to the public if there are any questions from the public. Seeing none, we will bring it back to the Redevelopment Agency, and if there are, well, let's see, it's an implied motion, so all in favor? Thank you. If there is no objection, we will now adjourn as the Redevelopment Agency of Provo and reconvene as the Municipal Council of Provo by unanimous consent.
We'll now move on to item number 4, a resolution authorizing the Mayor of Provo City to negotiate and execute a post-performance sales tax increment reimbursement agreement between Provo City Corporation and Woodside Capital Partners. And Dixon Holmes will present on this one.
Good evening, Chair and council members, Mayor. This is an item that was been heard previously 2 weeks ago in the work session. To summarize, this is a post-performance retail sales tax increment deal with the new owners, developers of the East Bay Shopping Center. This is on the east side of University Avenue. They recently purchased, Woodside Capital Partners out of Texas recently purchased a major portion of what's known as the East Bay Shopping Center, but formally it starts at the Staples on the north end, runs through the Sportsman's Warehouse. Then there's an intervening property owned by a different group, which is the At Home. And then they pick up from where the Reams Boots down to what used to be the Hoagie Yogi or Teriyaki Sticks. They are working on and have announced that Ross clothing store will be filling or a portion of the shopping center. It's been vacant for some time now. As we had reached out to them and to other potential buyers, we had always told them, any potential buyers or current owner, that the possibility of a sales tax, a post-performance sales tax deal may be available subject to council approval for the purpose of overcoming the initial costs of re-energizing the shopping center. Obviously, there will be some expenses for the remodel and jump-starting that shopping center. Again, it's been notoriously vacant, and we think this will be something that will help bring on additional end-user retailers to that shopping center and help strengthen that, provide more additional offerings to our community. So the basic deal points and the request is for the council to authorize by resolution the mayor and the administration to negotiate the terms of the deal consistent with the basic deal points as outlined, which I'll go over in a second. This is also similar as far as the structure itself to a previous post-performance retail sales tax deal on the University Parkway for some different circumstances, but very similar in structure in that it is post-performance. It would be for a 10-year agreement. It is always above the baseline, so again, the city would measure the amount of sales tax that's being generated from the properties that they control only. That would establish a baseline, and they're requesting a reimbursement of up to $1.5 million. The way that it structures is they'd have the opportunity within that 10 years to earn back half of that money, again, always above the baseline. If there's time left within the 10 years, so again, if they earn the $750,000, then that would then be split with Provo City on a 50-50 basis going forward if there's any time left. So there's not a guarantee. It gives them a high incentive and high motivation to bring more retailers into the center. And that's part of our motivation for offering this incentive. If this center were already full or just one vacancy, we probably wouldn't be having that conversation. But where the project has been largely vacant for a number of years now, and with the expense of bringing in the Ross and the ability of them to bring in or attract other retailers, we think that this would be important and a good investment for the city. Again, protecting that the sales tax we're already receiving, so this is only if they perform above and beyond. I think we have a couple other slides just to kind of show how that would work for the public if they had any questions. So right now, we've kind of pegged this as a $20 million shopping center. In order for them to receive all of the incentive of the 1.5 million, they would have to essentially quadruple their sales, and we all hope that they're wildly successful in doing that. That would be the ultimate payoff and benefit to the city, is if they're able to fill it completely and be able to increase the revenue that much more to the city going forward. Unless the council has any additional questions for me, that's my presentation.
Thank you, Dixon. I've got a question about the base.
Okay.
Setting the base, is that based on a specific date or is it over a time period?
It would be, we would look back 12 months to see what the annual sales tax revenue generated to Provo City, and this is only the portion that comes to Provo City that we're talking about. That we would look back 12 months and establish that base. We'd work with the finance department to establish that. Right now, that base is right around $100,000 annually. That's an aggregate number over the entire center of the portion that they control. And so they'd have to perform above that base to receive any increment in a given year.
So they couldn't ask a tenant to leave and basically come back and say there's no revenue here, so that no income.
So if
point.
they actually may ask a tenant to leave, or if the
Sure.
tenant's up to bring in someone better. Again, as a shopping center owner, and Mr. Harrell is here with Woodside, and if you have questions for him, their incentive is to have a very full center and a very productive center, and lease agreements are written in a variety of ways, but having, and also there's greater value to the center by having a full center with good paying tenants who do well. So again, if they don't perform above that base, they get nothing from the city. So it's only when they perform above that base. And again, the base is low right now because of the vacancies. And again, as I mentioned, if this center were doing much better or substantially full, we more than likely would not be having this conversation. Just to incentivize the vacancies or to end the vacancies.
Are there any other questions by council members? This item is open for public comment, so we will now turn the time over to the public.
For the benefit of the under 12 crowd, oh, sorry, Joey
Please state-
Franklin,
Thank you.
Provo North. For the benefits of the 12-year-olds in the room, could you guys give us like a 2-minute breakdown of what exactly you're talking about here? And thanks.
Please, Dixon, go for it.
So this is a shopping center in East Bay. It's on the other side of the street. The mall's on the west side. This is on the east side. And it's in everyone's best interest when we have a retail center to have it full as possible. So sometimes we've experienced a rough economy and businesses close and we have vacancies. And that produces a couple of challenges. First, it reduces the amount of opportunities to buy goods and services in our own community. And local government, a major funding source is sales tax. So every time you buy something, you might see the sticker that says 99 cents, but you never get a penny back. You always have to give them $1.50 or $1.10 or $1.20, and they'll give you a little more change because there's that tax that gets added on. Provo City doesn't receive all of the sales tax. In fact, it only receives a very small portion. So for every 6.5 cents that is paid in tax, Provo City actually only receives half of a penny. Now, of course, they don't make half pennies, but over time, that kind of adds up and we get that money back, and it provides for the services in our community like police and fire and parks and other services in our community. And because the property has been sitting vacant, it's not generating tax, and it's also not providing a service, and it just looks bad. It looks like someone smiling with a lot of teeth missing. And so by incentivizing, and the incentive is that they will invest some money, the owner, if they'll put some money into the center and bring some new opportunities there, that the city will share some of that revenue with them if they perform above a certain baseline. And that baseline right now is pretty low because they've not been generating as much taxes as the opportunities exist. And so by bringing in someone like a Ross and some others that they're working with, it'll bring in more revenue to the city, it'll fill the vacancies, and it will give us more opportunities to shop in our own community to find those goods and services so we don't have to drive to another community. And as the council has asked, because that's an excellent question, is, well, do we do this for everybody? And the answer is no. We try to do it only in select situations where it would warrant this kind of an incentive. So again, if this shopping center were full, we probably wouldn't do that. And so again, this is our way of investing in our local commercial areas to incentivize more to happen than what's currently happening. And if you have questions, I'll stick around, we can talk outside, so.
Thank you, Dixon. Well done. Are there any other comments on this one? Thank you. We'll now then close public comment period and bring it back to council for any discussion or questions. Dave?
Just wanted to say, over the last 4 years, I've had a number of people ask me what the city's doing to stimulate development in that area in East Bay, and I appreciate you bringing this opportunity to us, and this is, I'm in favor of it, and this is something that we can do to stimulate and encourage that vacancy rate to go down.
This basically reimburses the developer for bringing Ross. If they bring Ross, then others will come. They wouldn't be asking for it if they were vibrant. But it's tough to invest in an investment that isn't returning anything to them right now, and we think this is a jump start that will make a big difference in that area. I'm voting for it.
I appreciate Mr. Dixon for his work on this and following through with his commitment to the area earlier. I appreciate that. I do have some concerns just in general with tax increment financing. I think that the market is cyclical. There are times where it'll be down and times where it will be up, and we do fund critical services to our residents through sales tax, and we need to be careful. If we set baselines at the bottom of the cycles and skim the top off of the ups of the cycles, that is not a good way to try to fund the services of our city. So we need to be very judicious with these tools and make sure that we're using them when they really make a difference. And I do feel like this deal is one of those. I do feel that for a long time other cities have used tax increment financing, which overall has put Provo City at a disadvantage because we have been fairly reticent to use these tools. I feel now we're playing a bit of a catch-up, and the situation, the environment has been created where many of these deals won't happen on their own unless local communities are coming up with these large incentives. And I think that's is in part just the way that the game has been played. And so I would like to see if we could reach out to other communities around the county and see if we can talk about responsible use, so it doesn't become an expectation of developers and of commercial groups. So, but I appreciate this deal, and I think it's good. I'll be voting for it, but I hope we are careful moving forward.
Any other comments from council? Okay, we have a applied resolution here, and if there's no changes to that resolution, do we need a motion? Sorry, it's an implied. Oh, it's an implied motion, thank you. With the implied motion, we will ask the council for a vote. Those in favor? That passes unanimously. Thank you, David. Thanks, Dixon. We will now move on to number 5, an ordinance amending Provo City Code, Provo City Code Chapter 6.18, fire alarm regulations, and Provo City Consolidation fee schedule to prevent overfrequency of false alarms. And I am looking for Chief Miguel, who I don't see at this point. Wayne, would you like to talk to us about this? I don't know whether...
I visited with Chief Miguel about it. He's actually out of town this week, and so I'm wondering if maybe there was a mix-up in the agenda scheduling. So if you'd be okay if we, Brian, you know something I don't.
I don't. In fact, we were exchanging some emails earlier because I had actually made a couple changes earlier in the week. They were, in my opinion, non-substantive, but I copied Chief Miguel just in case he wanted to review them, and I never heard back from him. Okay. So I think with all of that, it may be better to just continue it.
Continue it for 2 weeks, and then we'll come and give you a full report then.
Thank you very much. So I will look for a motion to do that at this time then. Mr. Stewart, thank you.
Second.
Mr. Harding, second. Thank you. Those in favor? Thank you. We will then move on to item number 6, an ordinance amending the Provo City Code to increase the minimum number of residential units, giving rise to requirement for recreational amenities in the general downtown DT1 zone in the downtown neighborhood. And Dustin Wright will give us a presentation on that.
Thank you. So this item is a request to be able to amend one of the downtown zones to allow for the amenity space requirement to be changed to require that new developments within that zone that have, the code currently says that 5 units or more have to provide 10% of their gross floor area as amenity space. The applicant is requesting to have that changed to be 20 units as opposed to 5 for a new project. So staff finds that there's some things that will help in the downtown to kind of help with some of the city goals to bring more residential units to the downtown. There's infill sites with the smaller sites within the downtown area that could benefit from this type of a change to help make it more financially feasible for that type of development to be able to bring more units as opposed to, let's say, a unit with a development that had 5 units then has to provide an amenity space. That amenity space would be 10% of that gross floor area, which wouldn't be very much space to really, in staff's opinion, to provide a usable space that would get used frequently. Whereas in a larger development with more people, with 20 units or more, you're going to have more people and more opportunities to make good use of that space. Staff sees it more beneficial that having an extra unit downtown would be more beneficial than a small workout room that maybe just can accommodate a bike and some weights or something like that. Other zones that require the amenity space, they have that 20 unit minimum requirement. And this item has gone to the Planning Commission. They recommended approval, recommended the council approve this proposed ordinance amendment.
Thank you, Dustin. Now, there has been a couple of requests from council for a little information. And at this point, because of council rule, we won't be, as Mr. Harding suggested, that we won't have any vote on item number 6 or 7 tonight because of council rule. And at this point, if there's council has any other questions or that they'd like to talk about this, before we open it up to any questions for.
So, yeah, you mentioned having a large enough space to be a usable space. And I'm not sure, maybe that's a little relative, but have we ever kind of defined what is a minimum size that would be really usable? And if so, then that kind of gives a baseline, and you can extrapolate that back and say, yeah, you got to have at least 20, let's say. So there's a correlation between the size. I mean, I tend to agree with 20, but have we done the numbers to reflect what's a usable space?
Well, yeah, and like you said, it's all relative, I think. So you can kind of imagine if you have 10% of a, what might end up being maybe 1,000 square foot space, isn't necessarily going to be a space where you can provide the same. If it's a workout facility, you wouldn't be able to provide the same amount of amenity within that smaller space that you would be able to provide in a 10,000 or 10% of a much larger development. You'd get a much bigger amenity space that would be more usable, I guess is the word I'm using, but you'd have more amenity within that space to justify it. So that's kind of, there isn't necessarily a magic number like you're asking about, but I think everyone can kind of see what a smaller space would be able to hold and how often that would get used by a handful of tenants versus a larger space with much more tenants that would be wanting to use that space.
Right. So it's hard to quantify, but you know it when you see it.
Well, yeah, I think there's one of the people that called about the project. They mentioned that they provided a space an amenity space that was used for events, and they said that it didn't get used very often, throughout the year because it just wasn't, I guess maybe a big enough space or the right type of use, I guess. So, whereas if they were allowed to put in an extra unit or two instead of that space, that would have been maybe a better use of that space.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dustin. Now, as we go through this, I do see that this first item will be open for the applicant, and I don't see Mr. Soder here. Oh, there's Greg. Would you like to comment on this?
Good evening. First of all, thanks for what you do. I am not a full-time professional developer. I have developed a couple of properties, and we're in process right now of wanting to construct a very nice-looking apartment complex immediately east of what we call the Old Chapel. You may be aware that a few years ago I purchased the old Provo 4th Ward, cleaned it up, and we've turned that into quite a successful operation. And our experience, since we do smaller items, is there seems to be an economy of scale. And I'm a little bit like Dustin just was. I'm not sure I can quantify what that economy of scale is, but on the size of projects that we do, 10% amenity space just isn't enough to provide anything of significance. And it's hard to quantify that, but if we use the extreme on the low end and we say there's a 5-unit apartment that is maybe 4,000 square feet, 10% of that is 400 square feet, and if you use part of that outside and part of it inside, then you're left with a little tiny room inside, and which isn't usable. And then the other issue that impacts that in the downtown area is that this group did such a killer great job a few years ago of investing $1 bazillion in the rec center. It kind of gets down to a thing of who in their right mind would want to stand on a treadmill in a little tiny room, sweating and smelly, if they can go over to the rec center and use that gorgeous facility. So it just doesn't seem to work. The other issue that occurs to me, or that I think is pertinent here, is the fact that the rest, as I understand it, the same code requires that apartments of 20 or more units require amenity space. And I have no idea or understanding why in the downtown zone that requirement has been lowered to 5 units or more. And so it just makes sense from a lot of perspectives to make it consistent throughout the community. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
I've got a question.
Yes, sir.
Greg. I am so grateful for what you done with the old Fourth Ward Chapel. I am too intimately acquainted with that building myself, and I am so grateful to see what has been done and where it's at right now.
Thank you.
With that building, you were under the old situation. What amenities did you provide for that building? How did that
We
play
split
out?
it 50-50. We put some amenities inside, a couple of fairly small rooms, and then we had been told that an outdoor garden space would really be popular. And we had some prospective tenants and others say, gosh, Greg, we would love to have some planter boxes out here where we can grow some tomatoes and cucumbers and flowers and so forth. We said, well, that sounds like a great idea. We did that. It was just totally unused. It became a weed patch. And we still have tenants say, oh gosh, we really like that and we're going to use that someday. And it sits there as a weed patch. And so while I don't want to sound, can't think of the word for it right now, sarcastic or like I have a bad attitude, but I think that in a lot of situations, quote, amenity space in a rental property really sounds like a great idea until it comes time to use it. And then it's it's wasted space, it's a piece of junk. And that is generally the experience that we have had. I'm certainly not saying that Provo shouldn't require amenity space, but it does make sense. If you're going to require amenity space, give the developer, the funder of that space, enough latitude that they can do it right. And doing it based on 5 or 10 or 15 units just doesn't seem to work. I'm reminded of there was a time in my life when it seemed like every new office building, just the cool thing was, boy, we're going to put a racquetball court in this new office building, and won't that be cool? And I've seen a lot of racquetball courts in old office buildings, and I don't know that I've ever in my life seen or heard of a racquetball game that goes on in those courts. So I think it may sound like a good idea on the surface, but in reality is not of much use. Did I answer your question, Gary?
You absolutely did. Thank you.
By the way, this is a great neighbor. This is a really great neighbor. I love being next door to Gary Winterton. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is the neighborhood chair here now? Would like to speak to this? Quinn, don't see Quinn here right now. Thank you. We will then open it for public comment. Is there anyone here in the public that would like to comment on this item? Okay, we will close this and bring it back to council for any questions or discussion that we have on this. Dave?
Just a comment and a request for staff, since we won't be voting on this for another 2 weeks. Could you be prepared to comment if you have a recommendation as to whether we should broaden this to include DT2 as well as DT1?
Okay. You've got some marching orders, I guess. Again, this item will automatically be continued to the next regularly scheduled meeting. We'll move now on to item number 7. An ordinance amending the Provo City Code to allow dental laboratories as permitted in the community shopping center. Community shopping center zone. Dustin, thank you.
So the applicant on this one is requesting to be able to amend the SC2 zone to allow for a new permitted use, land use to be allowed there for a dental lab only. And that use would be SLU 6515. And it would have the caveat that it's for dental labs only and not for any other uses that are associated with that standard land use code. This use would be harmonious with the existing permitted uses in that zone. It'd provide greater flexibility to help meet some economic development needs for any vacant spaces that might be there, to just provide an extra permitted use that could be utilized. And there's that desire right now for the applicant to be able to have that use permitted there so that they could move in and be able to operate that type of business. So staff finds that that would be a good use for that zone, and doesn't see any issues there. The Planning Commission has heard this item and recommended that the council approve it as well. I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. We did discuss this in the work meeting today, and I think there are a few questions that we have raised and look forward. Does anyone want to reiterate? Do you have any questions about our questions from work meeting?
I don't think so.
Okay. Again, this is one item that will need to be automatically continued because of council rule, and we'll have that scheduled for the next city council meeting. Oh, thank you, Dave. Before we do that, is there anyone that would like to comment on this particular item? Okay, and Mr. Evans, the applicant, is he here by chance? Does he have anything he would like to say at this point? Okay, Mr. Harding.
I appreciated the conversation in the meeting earlier, discussing what the public interest in this change, and I see it as somewhat of a balance. I believe there are pros and cons to this proposal. On the con side, you were talking about a dental lab being zoned into a community shopping area zone. So this zone is designated for space for shopping. And we have a laboratory which is not retail, doesn't sell products, doesn't sell services, doesn't bring customers, clients into the area. And so I think that the negative is if we allow our retail space to be, stores to have to compete against things like laboratories, and if this dental lab or other things like it move into these commercial areas, these retail areas, I think it can dilute our shopping areas and drive down the vibrancy and the population that will use these areas that are important for the success of a shopping area. On the flip side, if you have a vacant space in these retail areas, that can potentially affect the viability of them, and it definitely, vacant space is definitely not bringing people to the shopping area and can make it a less pleasant and less attractive shopping option. So I think that to me is the balance. Are we overall helping by reducing vacancies and making these at-risk shopping areas more viable, or are we diluting the shopping experience that we're looking for. One of the things that I struggle with is this is a change being applied for by a particular person, a particular applicant for a particular spot, but we are changing the zone for all SC2 properties in the city. So this may be very good for, in one particular instance, but I do think we need to be considering what might be the unintended broader consequences of this decision.
Any other, public comment or council comment? Dave?
Yeah, I really appreciate your pros and cons and analysis. I think the public probably appreciates that too. As we go forward with an economy that is changing with the internet, a lot of things being sold that way, we may not see the heyday of retail like we grew up with. And so we have to keep, I think, our options open to make sure that our malls stay vibrant, East Bay stays vibrant, or, maybe these turned into almost like mixed use environments. But that's better than having empty storefronts. But nonetheless, I liked your analysis.
Okay.
I think in answer to Mr. Hardy's analysis, which is good, I think also we can throw it back to the private marketplace and say if a landlord has someone that will rent it now, he wants to change it to retail because the economy is so good that it's more beneficial. He can always either raise the rent high enough the lab's going to go somewhere else and not compete with retail space, but it puts it in the hands of the private market, and I think that can be helpful and kind of guide itself.
Are we talking? We've closed this issue for public comment. No, it was my fault. I spoke inadvertently. I apologize for that. Thank you. Okay, this will be again brought back in 2 weeks for further discussion and potential vote at that time. We will now open item number 8, a resolution to place approximately 12.33 acres of real property generally located at 3278 North Timpview Drive on the surplus property list. And it looks like we don't necessarily have any organized, but Mr. Robbins, I'm grateful that you're here to stand up. And Doug, will you come in and take a few minutes and talk to us about this? And then we will be opening up to public comment. And what I would like to do, normal public comment is 2 minutes. And should anyone wish to take longer than 2 minutes, if we could have designated people that were willing to yield their 2 minutes to someone that would like a few more minutes than 2, would you please make that known? And I think what would be good is if they're going to designate their time, if they would come up and sit in the front row so that we'll know who is designating their time to a specific speaker. Doug, will you go right ahead? Sure. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you tonight and share a little bit of background about Timpquanis Park. And some of the intent that we have is to share information that will help the municipal council make a wise decision in this proposed surplus of property. As you can probably appreciate, Parks and Recreation, those of us with Parks and Recreation are generally not proponents of releasing land, especially parkland. But in this uncommon circumstance, we think there is an opportunity to resolve some long-standing community issues by working together with the Provo City School Board and the Municipal Council to solve these problems comprehensively. I'm joined tonight with Tara Riddle, Provo City's property manager, that can brief the municipal council a little bit about the background of the site itself and land ownership and how it was acquired. Thomas McKenna, our projects manager, who can discuss a little bit about the Land and Water Conservation Fund and the process that is involved in the conversion process. And then our director, Scott Henderson, who can speak a little bit about the path forward. It's probably wise to talk about the issues that have brought us all together. A little over 50 years ago, Provo City began acquiring property at this site for a park. And then shortly thereafter, the school district began building a high school. And it was some years after, I believe. But land and water conservation funds were used to acquire this property and to develop the park. And with those funds come obligations, long-term obligations. And part of that is that it's used perpetually as open space to the public. Over that time, the park was increasingly more used as school district program space, and that use and need has grown over time. During a recent Land and Water Conservation Fund review by our state representative, Provo City staff was notified that we had some compliance issues with this and another issue. But this one specifically because of that increasing primary use of school district use of the property, which is less than compliant and growing in that idea of non-compliance. We take that as pretty serious. We don't take that lightly, and it's a problem. And just kind of letting that go would be irresponsible. So we'd like to address that so that we don't lose any potential ability to receive funding in the future. Shortly thereafter, the Provo School District approached us about the potential acquisition of that problem. They have some issues with regard to Title IX that they could probably answer a little bit better than us. But the high school has space issues, and that's a big problem for them. Those are also federal requirements that they need to comply with, and so it's a very real concern for them, and they want to be responsible as well. So again, the municipal or the school district representatives could probably speak to their Title IX issues a little bit better, but what they've communicated to us is they desire to remedy their situation by acquiring this property and consolidate all their athletic sports with the high school at one site on one campus. And that's similar to the same model they used at Provo High School. It appears moving the southwest baseball field and the Fox Field into one campus location on the west side of Provo. Thomas will speak a little bit about the particulars about land and water conservation, but we intend on the same note to resolve our land and water conservation fund requirements by transitioning the designation, that perpetual open use, to another site. And the law allows us to do that through a process called conversion. And there's quite an involved process, but this is one step in it, this surplus action. So in summary, these issues won't just go away on their own. It's going to require mutual and concerted effort by both of these bodies. And we feel that we have an opportunity to really make some changes that are going to benefit both of the communities that are served by these groups. Thomas.
Good evening. As Doug mentioned, I've been asked to give a brief history or timeline of the park. As I've been going through the history, I found that the park has actually been known by several names. The Banoose Park, Timp Banoose Park, and Edgemont Park. On January 15th of 1967, Provo City was granted federal land water conservation funds to purchase property for a new park in the northeast part of Provo. The project described development of picnic facilities, a ball field, tennis courts, a tot lot, and a 2-unit restroom facility and pavilion. So after they were granted the funds, the city started looking for property that they could place these particular facilities on. So on December 12th of that same year, so 1967, Provo City acquired a little over 10 acres from Junior and Maxine Banoose for the park. So this is the main area here. The city paid the agreed value of the land, which was just over $57,000. Mr. and Mrs. Banus transferred the property to Provo City with a warranty deed with no deed restrictions, which means that there were no restrictions in the deed as far as what the use would be. On May 29th, the Banus family signed an agreement to settle a condemnation action, which Provo City took against them, for the acquisition of a right-of-way for a pedestrian walkway. So the city was trying to connect this neighborhood down to the park. So they wanted to have a walkway. And so they initiated that action to acquire the walkway. So instead of actually going to condemnation, they were able to settle with the Banus family. So in consideration for the property, Lawrence Banus was paid just over $1,500, and Junior and Maxine Banus received a parcel of city property, which helped to strengthen the southern boundary line of the park and also give them some property to kind of square up their property as well. A condition of that agreement was that at the time the park was officially named, that it would bear the Banus name. On June 4th of 1969, Junior and Maxine Banus donated a 0.64 acre parcel of property, which is this piece right here. It's on the hillside, for further development of the park. And that parcel is located along the hillside and actually included the area that has the walkway on it. The value of the donation was just over $5,300 per acre. That deed was given to us by way of quitclaim deed, and it also had no restrictions on the use. And then in December of 1986, Junior and Maxine Banus deeded an additional 0.74 acre parcel, which it's this area right in here, for future development of the park, which is also part of the hillside. We received that property by quitclaim deed, also with no reversionary clauses or restrictions for the use. So that in a nutshell is the history, and now I'll turn the time over for Thomas to talk about land and water conservation funds.
Thank you, Tara and Doug, for that. Thank you, Council, for letting me present this portion of our presentation. So just to give you a little bit of better understanding, the Land and Water Conservation Fund, it has significant federal and state regulation. We also refer to it as Section 6F, as those two terms are pretty much interchangeable. So between those two, you'll understand what we're talking about. Again, the intent when a piece of property is purchased with these funds is that it remain as outdoor open space, public outdoor open space in perpetuity. The law, this federal law, discourages casual discards of facilities, and we understand that. As we've gone through this process, again, this is definitely not a casual discard, as we've gone through this. And to us, nonconformance is a major issue, as Doug has explained. Being in nonconformity limits us and what grants we can apply for. And again, with the property that we are in nonconformance on, we also want to be proactive on this property as well, so that we can eliminate this issue and begin to apply again for grants. Again, as I talked about, these properties, the purpose is to hold them as open space in perpetuity. Again, that's not feasible in all cases, and conversion is the process under federal law to remedy these cases. So with that said, the conversion process, there's some funding qualifications. This, as this property potentially, if it's sold, it has to be a financial transaction. This property will be appraised and has been appraised through a federal process. It's a very meticulous process. And what it does is it appraises the property as highest and best use. And that initial appraisal that has been done has valued the property at $2 million. Those funds, if this is sold, would then be applied as a land purchase, and it can only be used as a land purchase in this case. Again, this property that we would purchase needs to be unsubscribed, meaning that it's new open space. It's not part of our master plan. It cannot be part of a master plan. You know, there's been talk of using this to improve the Canyon Road Park. Looks like there we go. To improve the Canyon Road Park to the northeast. Unfortunately, they cannot be used for that. And again, this new property that will be acquired, that could be acquired, if it is sold, it would have primary outdoor public recreation use, and it would be in perpetuity. There's also been questioning, what does it mean to surplus? I know that to surplus merely means that the property is being placed on a list that it could be sold. It's just a process that is required to go through. You know, as we've talked about, this is definitely a process, and here is a anticipated schedule that we have to date. If you look, the red line on the process is where we're at currently. There is definitely a lot of process still to go through. Because this is, again, federal, we are putting together an environmental assessment that will be used, that will be released for public comment. Again, this process is an open process, and there is definite ample opportunity to provide input from all stakeholders, from those involved in this process. You know, as we move forward with this, and if this property is surplused, I'll turn the time over to Scott to talk about, Scott Henderson, our director, to talk about an interlocal agreement.
Thank you for listening to this process on a complicated site. So this is the interlocal agreement as it exists right now. And obviously there'll be changes going forward if we decide to go forward with this process. First of all, we talked about that the appraised value of the sale is a Land and Water Conservation Fund requirement. It'll be school use of the fields and neighborhood use. No programming by Provo City will be done on this site. It's open for the neighborhood. The school purposes will be defined by this agreement, what activities will be held there and what activities are approved. The pavilion will be moved closer to the playground. The pavilion we have there is in a fairly advanced state of disrepair, so that's something that replacing that and moving it closer to the playground was something the school district has agreed to do. They would maintain the children's playground and keep that as a location. A multi-purpose field would go on to the existing park property. The school district, as part of the agreement, would be responsible for secure access to the road gate, so that users and responsibility would lie with the same group. We'd have clear easements for the existing utilities on the site, and the requirements and process for change of use. This is really important. This is an important part of this agreement. So any change of use or any change in the green area requires both the school district and the municipal council to approve that change of use. So as a green space in Provo, this is the only one in Provo that has this level of oversight and protection on it under this arrangement. So both government entities would have to approve that. So let's go over the schematic design of the issues and the locations that was talked about by earlier presenters. You can see the proposed softball field. The field used to exist on the Edgemont Elementary property. The construction on that necessitated the move of that field. Right now, Parks and Recreation is working cooperatively in providing an off-site area during this transition at Harmon's Park. But this shows the softball field location on school district property. Those lines, the property line was right about here on this property. So it shows the softball field, but then this area, as you can imagine with Timpview, was utilized in its own space. So then that what moves the multi-purpose field down into this park area here. You can see the volleyball court. The school district has committed to replacing this volleyball court over here and the old pavilion up here to a pavilion closer to the existing playground. So I think this is a good visual of the before and after of this site. So if this area would changes ownership, what I see is that all public green space remains, and because of the agreement, any changes to the green space would have to go before. So you can see this is where the new multi-purpose field would be in the after, and so it does require some tree removal, and we showed some tree planting on this side. So when you look at this side by side, this actually shows the location of the new pavilion and the tennis courts, but we see this as a space, and we talked a little bit of why Parks and Recreation participates in this. Number one, both, the key issue is we both have issues in this area that we need to solve. But we do see as the end, we were as much a part of negotiating these terms of sale as the neighbors' comments were, and the school district and their concerns, and Parks and Recreation and Provo City were all represented in this. And maintaining this as an open space was very important to us also. So we know, and it doesn't take a great skill set to read the room, that we know this is causing anxiety in this neighborhood, and we love this neighborhood. Even though we don't see a loss of green space as part of this change of ownership, to move forward and to go forward, and if this goes through, in good faith, Parks and Recreation will be proposing to the Municipal Council and to the Mayor that the undeveloped park, which you can see that will not be the final name of the park. Canyon Road Park did not stretch our imagination in any way on that, but Park and Rec will be proposing that the undeveloped park land on Canyon Drive that is shown there, we ask that that be moved to the top of the list and the next to be developed, and then we will assemble a neighborhood team like we do with every park development, and then talk about the amenities to be included in this neighborhood park also. So even though the green space in this neighborhood does not go down, but we can see that the need for a true neighborhood park is still needed in this neighborhood, in this community, and we would like to propose that to the council and the mayor as part of the budget process. So I know we're joined by McKay Jensen, who is the chairman of the school board also, so I would defer if he needs has anything to say, or if he would like to wait for the questions and talk at that time, but that's all we have as a presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Henderson, and I very much appreciate getting that other park considered. Okay.
I think you're good recreation department. You're being served very well there. I appreciate you giving me just a moment. We're here today to come up with the best possible thing for our community. That's what you're elected for, and that's what I'm elected for. And I encourage you to be rigorous in looking out for your community. We're very sensitive that there is a neighborhood here that doesn't want to lose a sledding hill, doesn't want to lose a pavilion or a place that they've grown accustomed to taking a family for picnics and other things. We don't either. Throughout this, I've appreciated this process because I've learned some things. It's a bunch of people here today that will say, the school district is untrustworthy. And I've learned quite a bit of history. As I stand here today, there is a sign on the track, fence that says no public access without written authorization. That indeed is not the current policy of the school district. But I know that those signs are there. So that's something that we've got to do in being better neighbors. I've heard talk that the reason that the playground exists is because the school district disallowed access to the playground at behind Edgemont Elementary. That is also not the current policy of Provo School District. But we've got to do a better job at being a good neighbor. We're going to be in that neighborhood. People are very worried that we're going to put a building there. It's terrible geology, and we have to be good neighbors. Our original plan in the very beginning when we started looking for a place for a softball field was that in that open green space where our students are the predominant use, even today, we were going to put the softball field. As we've gotten feedback from the neighborhood, we know that that's not acceptable. The softball field should go on our current property, and the character and spirit of that park should stay as Benoist Park. Junior Benoist still lives on the street. I think the school board would be in favor of retaining its name and its designation as a park. We'll need a place for our lacrosse and our soccer teams to practice. We'd love to have in that interlocal agreement that soccer field not be a regulation field. So there's never a temptation to put a competition there or a tournament there. That it would be reduced size that is proper for practice, for fitness, but that it remains an open green space without fencing towards the road, with the parking still adjacent to the road, with a pavilion that if the community would like to schedule that, I'm sure that in our after hours facilities currently, the Parks Department schedules that. If they would prefer that the city retains the ability to schedule the pavilion for family reunions on a Saturday, certainly they have better facility to do that than us, and we are dependent upon our relationship with you, which you know, in so many things. We have to have a good relationship. There is concern about the strength of an interlocal agreement, what that can be. I encourage you to find the best instrument that can give the community the assurance that their park is their park. Where we're trying to create a win-win situation, as cliche as that sounds, is that we understand that there are 2,000 students on the corner of Quail and Timpview Drive. There are probably plans and efforts to make that grow gradually to 2,200 students. We need to accommodate those, not just in classrooms, but in green space and in facilities that are actually becoming more and more important to our education of our children. Our current employers tell us they want the soft skills. They want the soft skills that are learned in teams and in being together. That's the purpose for a school. It's not just classroom space. We need the green space. We need to retain our baseball field. That whatever reason has led us to put that field is now basically $1 million investment. It would cost us $1 million plus real estate to move it somewhere else. We'd like not to spend that money again. We need the green space as we grow to those 2,200 students over the next decade. And we'd like it to be of benefit to our community. There is a difference between a city and the school district. Our interest is our students. We will probably have a lock on some part of the track gates because the news tells us that we need to secure our campus. But we're doing our best to provide access to the public for our track, to our tennis courts. It is in our intent to keep a park that could be signed as the Benoist Park. But we'd like, whether it changes hands or not, we fear with 2,200 students, we're going to put more and more pressure on that ground, on that land. It will push you further and further out of compliance. That's a cost to our community. We would like to do our best. It's not an easy thing for a school district to spend money on anything that's not a teacher or a book, but we're costing our community with that baseball field. It's a cost when we put more and more activities into that green space, which we're entitled to. Our kids that go to Timpview are citizens of Provo, and so they're going to go into the park to practice for cross country. And other things during the school day. But we would like the city and the community to get the full benefit of that use. We'd like to make it right for our community. It's awfully generous how things have been in the past, but we'd like to do our best. And we'd like you to focus this evening on what's at hand, and that is there's not a full interlocal agreement between the council and the school board. I can't speak for my entire board, just like you're familiar about what you can speak of for your council when you're all alone in another location. But I would like you to vote to continue that process so that we can come to agreement. If we can't come to agreement, then you can take it back off of the surplus. But I think it's worth the effort to create that win-win. It's worth seeing what could be done for the benefit of our community, and because that's what we're here to do and what we're sworn to do. And I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. McKay, I don't know if you have the opportunity to stay a little bit if there's any questions. Thank you so much. This is now time, we'll have time for a public hearing. And again, if there is someone that would like to designate their time, if they would also come forward, sit up front with whoever they have designated their time to, that would be greatly appreciated. We'll just allow that person to come up and say, I am representing whoever's sitting on the rows with them. It makes it really difficult, to do. I would just as soon have, if you're going to designate your time the whole time, so that we can keep, so we'll know if someone wants 2 minutes, they will sit down and say you've got 2 minutes. You don't have to take the whole 2 minutes, but I would encourage you to talk with the person that you've designated your time to make sure that your statement is heard. One more question, and then we're going to turn it over.
I'm willing to designate my 2 minutes, but I don't know who would want it.
Okay, and that's the question. That's what we've asked beforehand. Those that would like it, maybe they can come forward. Maybe the person that says, I've got 10 minutes worth, I need 5 people to help me out. And we will allow that at this point. And so right now, I will open this to public comment.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Can I just make a quick comment?
Yes.
I just want to make it clear that we're happy to hear from everyone if that's their preference. This is an option that we're...
Oh, yes. If everyone would like to speak and not designate their time, I apologize that but this is the standard procedure, is 2 minutes. for public comment. And normally we allow, except for Marion. Thank you, Marion. You get to have a couple minutes more, but not right yet. Just give me a second here. As the neighborhood chair, we do designate them about approximately 5 minutes, if they would like that. And what else am I missing, Brian? Is there anything that you can advise me on here? Normally, this is the comment period. Like I said, we do it for 2 minutes, and we are trying to accommodate as many people as we can. And normally, we just end this at with a 15-minute period. But I appreciate you being here tonight, and we will do what we can to accommodate as many people as possible through this process. Marion, let's turn the time to you.
Marion Monahan, Edgemont Neighborhood Chair. Council, Mayor, thank you for this opportunity. Our neighborhood is concerned about the Title IX issue. Obviously, all students should get the same benefits and opportunities for education and extracurricular activities. We feel that the Edgemont neighbors have talked this over and have given many options to the school board and suggestions of what they can do, including putting it back on the Edgemont property where it was located before, and that seems like the most obvious thing to do. It's already there, they own the land. As stated in the requirement for conversion of the LWCF, we don't feel that all practical alternatives to the conversion have been evaluated at this time. The neighbors feel a real ownership to this park. And I think it relates back to the fact that the Benoose family, who still lives there, very dear to our neighborhood, sort of were pressured to sell this. And they did, thinking that it was going to be a park which was going to benefit them and their neighbors. And this is very important to us. Not only that, you've got to agree that it was purchased from Land, Water, Conservation Fund, and there are really, like they've all said, they're firm. And part of the directive states that the purchase of this land shall be retained and used as public outdoor recreation in perpetuity. The other reason the neighbors feel so strongly about this is that, indeed, the children in the neighborhood were asked to leave the Edgemont playground, not to play there anymore. That's the school owns that. And so our neighbors all got together, asked for a city grant, matching grant from the city, and it took quite a bit of effort. We raised the money, worked hard on the park in order to get our own playground equipment. So the neighborhood feels very strongly about that. The park is already used by many, many people, not just the neighborhood. It's the surrounding community uses it all the time. It's used by ultimate frisbee, little league games, reunions, sports activities, everything. Now, we're very willing to share this property with the high school. We've been doing it for years, and I think that is the win-win situation, that we are willing to share. Let's take the lock off the baseball field and open it up for everybody and come to an agreement like the city has with the swim team on the rec center. We've held several meetings about this, and of course, there are some people who are opposed to it. They're always the people who want their students to have the softball field, excuse me. And we understand that, but why can't we share? We've been doing it for a long, long time. The vote in our most recent meeting last Thursday indicated that all the residents that live in Edgemont are opposed to selling this park. There were a few who do not live in the neighborhood who were in favor.
Can I have you restate that statement? Because all the residents that were at the meeting, there's a difference.
That's better to say that and I'm sure you've been getting letters and stuff from other residents who are opposed to this. As a concession, we've been given to understand that there could be an interlocal agreement that requests the school board to keep up the playground and so on. But we realize that that sort of agreement can be changed simply with 2 public meetings. So that has us a little bit worried. In closing, cities should never give up open spaces, which are so valuable to neighborhoods. No amount of money is worth giving away the enjoyment of neighborhood parks. Please do not surplus this beautiful asset to our community at this time. Thank you.
Pam Jones. I'm one of the vice chairs of Edgemont Neighborhood. A couple of school bonds ago, Timpview High School was in desperate need of a second gym with the stipulation that it would be available for public events. I've never heard of any public events going on there. Maybe I just didn't hear. But I've also heard and seen where a lot of the facilities in this Benoist Park have been fenced off, and apparently there's a discrepancy in whether they are locked or not. In the end, if you take away land that is now completely open to the public for a diamond field, that takes, and the high school students are using them, that means that the neighbors can't use them. I have been in touch with some neighbors of mine who, as recently as this morning, said, "Oh, we love our park. We don't want to get rid of it." I feel like the council and the school district need to be more considerate of the neighbors, the people who actually live there. I can see the logic of having all of the school facilities together. And I would rather that you build a park someplace near. I've heard there's this section of land up between Canyon Road and Timpview. It's a very big parcel, but I don't think all of it is planned to go to a new park. So I would suggest, with all the complications, that we take some more time to have more discussion and research before you do anything else like surplusing.
Thank you, Pam. With the neighborhoods being, and we have one more vice chair that we'll give a couple minutes to right now.
Sharon Mehmet, Vice Chair for this neighborhood. We had a couple of thoughts. From a summary from the meeting by Mike Rohn was that the concerns, and they've been mentioned, the concerns of the neighbors centered in 2 areas. First, trust. The neighbors do not trust that the Provo School District will keep their word. They do not trust that the legal agreement can be tightened down enough to ensure open space for public use. The neighborhood has been losing control of this park over time to Timpview High School. They do not trust the school district will keep an open park type area when they gain control. They do not trust that the school district will not sell off the property or move the school to the south end of the property at some future time. Second, they're concerned for the loss of the park in this area. I had 3 thoughts. One part of the code of the LWCF with which the land was purchased mentions that no land acquired with LWCF assistance shall be converted to other than public outdoor recreation uses without the substitution of other recreation properties of at least reasonable equivalent usefulness and location. We wondered if some kind of conservation easement or deed restriction could be considered to revert the land back to City Park as a park in the event that the school district decides they don't choose to use it for open space such as a park or school fields. And an environmental study must be completed before the sale can even be approved by the state representative at the National Park Service due to the nature of those LWCF monies with which we purchased the land. While that study is begun, it won't even be complete until the summer. So we feel like it's much too early in this process to even consider surplusing the land. And on the issue of time, we kind of I've been in other meetings where I've witnessed that if several people don't come up and speak to this issue, you kind of feel like maybe it's just the same 4 or 5 people that have this opinion and the rest of them maybe are for what you want to vote for. So we kind of encouraged our neighbors to come and cede just half of their time to Jay Goodlife because he's worked so hard on creating a good bullet point and keeping it succinct.
Okay, well, just Mr. Boudinous, thank you. Can we have just 1 second here? With that being said, and I appreciate the neighborhood chair and vice chair and the time that they've taken, what we'll do now is allow 2 minutes for those that would like to speak and those that were here to allocate their time to Mr. Goodliff. When it's his turn to come up, if you would come up and be represented so that he can have the time sufficient that you will be giving up to him. Thank you very much. We'll now open it to public comment.
Well, I'm the Boudinous of the Boudinouses here. Anyway, thank you for time, and I'd like to just clarify a couple of points back in the history of how the city ended up with the property. Back in, it was an orchard, and we built a new house in 1965 on the property. And prior to that, the school had picked up enough property north of us to satisfy their needs for a new school. But after we lived in our house, the school board called a meeting at our home, and he wanted to buy our fruit orchards. And I said, no, they're not for sale. And he said, have you heard of eminent domain? And I said, no, what does that mean? Well, that was quite a few years ago. And he explained that they had the power to force us to sell. And so I said, no, we're not going to do that. And in the meantime, a short time later, they come back again and said, we're going to take your property. And I said, no, we'll go to court. So we hired Jackson Howard to defend us and to go to court. And over a period of time, we discussed with Jackson, and I think he's the one that really came up with the proposal to sell it to the city. And he said, would you be willing to sell it to the Provo City as a city park? And I said we'd think about it. And so I consulted with, is that the 2 minutes?
That's 2 minutes, but Mr. Boudinous, if it's all right with the council here, I would like to give you just a few minutes more.
Oh, okay,
just a
thank
minute
you.
more or so. Thank you.
And so Jackson came up with the idea of the city purchasing, and in my consulting with advice from my family, brothers and sisters, they thought, well, you're going to lose it anyway, and this would be a far better solution than trying to go to court and fight and try to get more money and out of the trees or whatever. And so that's the way we ended up selling and getting into agreement with the city, and it was to go to a park. Well, I could spend more time on more things, but I'll probably end it here. But we love the park. We still live there, and it's active. I found out recently that all the time we go into the ball diamonds and fly kites and play, we're doing it without permission from the school and against the rules. So I hope we can keep that park in Provo City and keep it as is. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Banus.
I'm Lynn Garner from Edgemont neighborhood. I want to portray some of the feeling that the neighbors have. From the outset, the public has been told that the school district's motivation for this transaction was a Title IX issue. But we discovered that Timpview has room to build a softball diamond right now on their own property. In fact, if this purchase goes through and they do not immediately build a softball diamond, they will have a Title IX issue. They will be out of compliance. So it must be that Title IX is not the real reason. We don't know what the real reason is. The city has told the public that their main motivation for the sale of Banus Park is to avoid non-compliance with the federal LWCF restrictions. But we discovered that the only way the city may have been non-compliant is in allowing Timpview to use the city's baseball diamond in Banus Park exclusively. Well, that's very easily remedied, and so non-compliance is not the real reason. We wonder what the real reason is. Because of these disingenuous claims, the public does not feel that they have been dealt with honestly, nor have they been listened to honestly. And our very real fear that we may eventually lose access to Banus Park is heightened by feelings that we cannot for sure trust the school district or the city in this matter.
Hi, I'm Randy Lindquist, and I'm a softball player at Timpview High School. I'm a senior, and I've had 2 years on our own softball field. The past 2 years, we have had to travel all the way down to Harmons Park, which costs us time and money to do that. With this purchase, we will be able to build our own softball field on the land that we currently use for a lacrosse field and practice fields for soccer and lacrosse. Right now, we have so many conflicts with all of our teams. And if we were to just not buy the land and just build the field there, we would have conflicts with the football team and the soccer team and lacrosse teams trying to all practice at the same time on the turf. And that isn't really the most ideal thing for us to do as a school. And yeah, thank you.
Hi, my name's Julie Wright. I live here in Provo. That was my daughter, and I'm very proud of her for coming up here because she's deathly scared of talking in public. So, but I've seen, that's one thing that just amazes me. For her to come up here and talk to you guys has helped her tremendously with softball. And I've seen these girls grow from having a field to play on to not having a field to play on now. Yeah, I mean, they do have a field, but not their own field and somewhere they can call home. But I feel like that this is a huge thing for them to have their field. I have a freshmen also, so I have a senior, but I do have a freshman, and I'd love to see these girls have that field and have that time so that they can learn to grow too, because huge team building, to not have a softball team would be just extremely difficult for these girls. So anyways, thank you very much.
So I'm Marlon Christensen. I've lived in the area, Edgemont, off and on for almost 40 years. I grew up on the park. I went to the schools there. Was there as a student and then afterwards in the community, and it's actually been a really harmonious relationship for the last 40 plus years or longer. One thing that's been, and actually as I said and listened to the presentation by the school board in the city, I thought this sounds really great. Though it's actually very similar though to what I've seen presented in work meetings, that are recorded and online. And what we never hear is the counterpoint. We never actually hear solutions or compromises in your work meetings from concerned individuals. And I guess this is we have 2 minutes to combat, 2 years worth of information and sometimes misinformation. What I've waited for is to hear overwhelmingly compelling reasons to set aside or ignore a number of different things. One, precedent. Across the state, there are schools and communities with very harmonious relationships where the city maintains control or ownership to allow access, but the school has free use of those facilities, and it works great. Obviously, the original intent of sale is being ignored or set aside. The will of the people. We have our citizens in Edgemont at every meeting expressing opposition to this, the majority expressing opposition. And so we really need a compelling reason, I think, to set that aside and say that it's not important. And finally, the compromises and the solutions that have been generated over the last year and a half, I don't think have had opportunity to be really presented to an entire city council, but or the school board, frankly. And so I think it's worth considering taking a step back and saying surplusing this land actually is a first step and a very important step, and shows intent. Whatever else people might say, before that's done, this really should be looked seriously, because we're talking about something that reduces quality of life for a huge segment of our community.
I'm Sam Ullman, and we had a park disappear in our neighborhood that was donated to the school district for the children to play on in perpetuity. And Mossy White thought that didn't apply to her because she was the school district head at that point, sold this property off. And now we don't have that park, and we don't have the access to it. And we have 5-story apartment buildings building around there, and these kids have nowhere to go. You can trust the school district to put signs up saying, don't play here, we'll arrest you. And they do arrest you down there on Provo School District. If a bunch of Hispanics are in there playing soccer, the cops will show up as a relationship between the city and the school without that written permission, even though I hear him say it's not our policy. What, insert square words, a lot of them, is the policy for the public to use public property, and the school district is public property. Have we forgotten that?
I live in a neighborhood close by. I haven't been in Utah for too many years, but recently I met Mayor Kafusi. And a comment that was made while we were in a meeting with her with my son, who's a scout, comes to mind. And she said that something had been voted on years ago, and money had been set aside, and it wasn't brought back to the public to be re-voted on. And the community was pretty upset. And She mentioned that had she been in office, she would have allowed that to go back to the vote of the people. I've been a parent for 20 years. I have kids in high school. I have kids younger than that. I've lived in communities with parks, and I know the value and the importance of that. When children don't have those areas, there are other things that go on, and that decreases the value of home properties. And I hear the student that says it's important to have, a place to play. However, high schools know how to coordinate, they know how to use their resources, and that's their obligation to do that. I hear a lot of people saying that they don't trust the school district. Coming here from California, moving in here, I dealt with quite a few problems that I already, in a very short time, created distrust. So I think it's very important to listen to those that are in the community and understand that they are the basis of what's there. And I can really appreciate the candidacy of the mayor, of her comments of saying what she saw was wrong and what she would do about it. Thanks.
Ma'am, would you state your name for the record, please?
Tonya Nicosia.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Frank Christensen. I've lived in Edgemont since Councilman Winterton was a newlywed in Shadowbrook condominiums some 40 plus years ago. I graduated from Edgemont and Timpview. My kids have been and are students at Timpview. When we moved back to Provo 15 years ago, we moved to Edgemont in large part because of the schools. So I just underscore that because I don't see this as an opposition between city and school or neighborhood and school, but also to underscore that the decisions being made here are, of course, have a multi-generational impact. I also want to acknowledge McKay Jensen's sentiments. He's a person I think is unimpeachable. I think everything he said was in good faith, and I actually agree with everything he said. But I also appreciate his acknowledgement when he said there is a difference between school and city, and his acknowledgement that our priority as a school district is our students. The neighborhood's priority is the neighborhood, of course, which includes the students. So the Venn diagram is more encompassing. And the only way I would differ with McKay is in saying that when he said we can be better neighbors, I actually don't think it's a case of being a bad neighbor when the school puts up a keep out sign. The person who puts up the sign is making the right decision by his lights or her lights. They're simply responding to a different set of institutional imperatives. So when we make commitments in good faith now, it's really impossible to ensure that those will be maintained 10, 20, 30 years down the road. And finally, I really haven't heard a compelling discussion of compliance and non-compliance. It was referenced here, and maybe it's already been addressed in other settings that just haven't been thoroughly vetted to the wider public. Thank you.
My name is Steve Sandberg. I'm a resident of the Edgemont neighborhood. And I first want to say thanks especially to the school board and to the city for all of the hard work and reaching out to the neighborhood in talking about these things. I want to recognize that things like moving the pavilion or looking at structuring the park were all done in connection with conversations we've had. But I wanted to follow up on Frank's comment because I think it's really important, which is that as each entity does what's best by itself, it puts the others in jeopardy. And I want to point out two things. First of all, we are all Provo City. It's unique that we have a school district and a city with coterminous boundaries. So we're not like Nebo School District having arguments among the different cities about how to use the money. This is all our money. We've all paid into the school district and to the city, and I still don't understand why the school district wants to pay $2 million for what we've looked like we could pretty much do with what's already there. Maybe they could put some of that money towards, they could buy this, they pay $1 million for the softball field right now. And maybe it's because the city needs the money to put into another park, and maybe there are other funds to go to, but I want to point that part out. Like, I don't see the compelling interest for that. And then the solution, if it goes to the school district, I have not found the restriction that gives me comfort that my kids will see a park there. I hear things like an interlocal agreement, and I'm sitting in a meeting where we're talking about undoing the federal regulation that we got federal money to put a park in perpetuity here, but apparently it doesn't really mean in perpetuity because we're undoing that to put it in perpetuity somewhere else, which may then be undone somewhere else. So maybe the school district, for like a true show of good faith, could say, we'll put all the residents' concerns to rest, we'll pay the Yellow Book full value if they still want to put the money into that, and they could do a conservation easement. Provo City has looked at things like this. Rock Canyon, something the city has now tried to preserve in perpetuity. Look at what you're doing with your city land there to make sure there's no development there. Something like that would go a long way towards what I sense is a lot of goodwill from softball, from its residents, from the school district, from the city, to find this mutually beneficial solution. I recommend those.
Hi, I'm LaDon Christensen. I live in the neighborhood. Thank you all for your service. I'm going to repeat some things, but first of all, I do feel a little frustration in the process with the work meetings. I feel like when a government entity is promoting an action, they get a lot more time than another viewpoint would get, meaning the citizens. I hope that could maybe be changed. I've spoken with Ryan, and I know I've lost his last name, but he is with the Water Resources, and he is the caretaker of a well that is in this park. He's very concerned about his well, and he wants it to remain pristine, and I feel like some of the other water issues in the park have not been fully addressed. And Ryan said, York is his last name, has not spoken at any work meeting, also as far as restrictions that have to happen around the well, and I think those need to be considered. There's also a canal that cuts through the middle of the park, and other drainage issues that come down through the ravine. Again, as neighbors, we've read the manual. We feel like we're doing due process as to why the park should be preserved in perpetuity, as that is what was agreed when it was paid for. We feel like there isn't a Title IX issue that we can see that is hold to water, or a compliance issue with the park. I live on the fence of the park, and I feel it's equally used by public and school. I'm there with the big window looking out there, and I see what goes on. I feel like the park should not be surplused until assessments have been completed and all considerations and commitments considered. And thank you for your time.
My name is Elda Benson. I'm part of the Edgemont neighborhood, and I'd like to piggyback on LaDon Christensen's statement. It's a great statement to bring up the Land and Water Conservation Fund, and I'd like to thank the council members for being here to listen to this highly emotional topic. The documents that I'll be reading from come directly from the Department of Interior Bureau of Outdoor Recreation. They are attached to the warranty deed on the purchase of this particular property. First of all, I'd like to read a statement that comes directly from those documents. And it does state in Section E, this manual, the state shall comply with the policies and procedures set forth in the Bureau of Outdoor Recreation Manual. Said manual is hereby incorporated into and made part of this agreement. So this part is part of the agreement for the sale of this land. And I will read one section to keep this brief. The project justification that was brought to the council when this purchase was made through LWCF, the project justification which Provo City brought to the state of Utah and the federal government to request funds for this park. Utah's Comprehensive Outdoor Recreation Plan indicates on page and it gives a page number, that all outdoor recreation programs should be accelerated to overcome today's deficiencies in opportunity and to meet anticipated future demands. It is also stated that special consideration should be given to acquiring outdoor recreation lands adjacent to school sites. So we're in compliance. We want parks adjacent to school property. We want the dual usage. We encourage it. We want it. The plan further notes on page 135 that the entire Utah County area of Provo, of which Provo is part, has a great need for more Class 1 and 2 recreation area facilities. It has been determined that about 2,419 acres of additional community parks and playgrounds are currently needed within the county. And it gives a number of acres required to meet demands in 1975. So in 1975, we were deficient at that time. So I don't think by selling the park, we are going to be even compliant, because I don't think I see it in the master plan where we've purchased additional park and green space area. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
My name is Boyd Mehmet. I've lived in the Edgemont area since about 1992 with my family, and I've enjoyed raising my children, which attended the Edgemont Elementary School, and consequently also attended Timpview High School and enjoyed the programs there as well. Over the time that I've been in the Edgemont area, I've watched orchards go away. I've watched nice pastures go away due to housing increases and stuff, and I understand that that is part of progress and that is part of change. I also see that this is an opportunity for progress and change, and you have the responsibility of choosing which direction our city and school district will go. There are many options on the table, and I feel like that many of the options are viable and could be considered win-win situations. I do request that you consider that the green spaces are going to become more scarce, and they're going to be more difficult with time to claim within the city limits of Provo. And you need to value those green spaces now as the highest possible value. $2 million does not represent what that green space really represents, in my opinion. If you are going to sell this property to the Provo district, I think that $2 million is undervalued because of the long-term value of what that asset could provide the community within. I would also recommend that you replace that with a park within Edgemont area, and that it would also be considered in perpetuity as well. Thank you.
Hello, James Benson. Chair Monahan mentioned that in the LWCF State Assistance Program Manual, it states that all practical alternatives to the conversion need to be evaluated and rejected on a sound basis. Also on utah.gov, there's a document from the Department of Natural Resources, which is with the State Assistance Program on grants. Under the summary of the conversion of uses processes, the very first thing they state is a conversion of use of any 6F project area should be avoided if at all possible. I have to agree with Steve Sandberg that we love the park. We are more than willing to share with the school to put, if the school district is willing to, and the Provo City willing to put facilities in on the park to improve the park so that Provo citizens who are part of the school district, who are the city people, can share that park and have more facilities available to use for all of us. We love our parks. We don't feel that it's in the best interest of all of the Provo citizens to be looking at the possibility of surplusing a park that's already established. We feel that a better use would be to improve the park and have dual usage with the school district and Provo City. Thank you.
I didn't get one of those nice manuals, so I must have missed the memo. There are a few things I want to say. Oh, sorry. My name is Quinn Karpowitz. I live in the Edgemont area, too. I'm a Timpview graduate. I've lived there for not as long as many of you guys have. The first thing I want to say is about the softball team. I had no... sorry, excuse me. I had no idea you guys had to travel so far. I played for Timpview football, and if Timpview football had to travel down to Harmon's Field to practice, I would imagine this room would be very different tonight, and that we would be saying to build a football field on that park. The other thing is, I think the biggest issue is a lot of people really like their green spaces. Having lived near this park and having been there, I've kicked people off the park as part of a team in the school, and I've also been kicked off of the park as a resident because teams need to practice there. It seems to me that it'd be pretty advisable to have in this agreement to build more green spaces, and I would suggest to the council that we should maybe be more proactive on issues like this and build more green spaces before it comes to situations like this where schools need to expand. I think the school comes first here, and I think it's pretty clear that the school is a little small and needs to grow. And I'm a big fan of Timpview sports, so I can't be against that. Anyway, thanks for letting me speak.
I don't think I'll be using all that time.
George, how many have we got and how much time do you need?
I won't need all that time.
Oh, Jay. Okay, how much time will you need? I would appreciate.
I had planned on 10. Would that be all right, 10 minutes?
Oh, I think you can yes, absolutely.
But can we see as you go, in case you want to say something back? My name is Jay Goodliff. I have lived in the city of Provo for over 20 years, Edgemont for the last several. My children have attended Wasatch Elementary, Edgemont Elementary, and Canyon Crest Elementary, Centennial Middle School, Provo High School, and Timpview High School. I was someone who worked hard on passing the bond bill that went forward for the school district. I provided time and material resources for that bond. I believe in public schools. I love the public schools. I love the city of Provo. And I'm grateful for this opportunity to speak to you and share some of the concerns that we as a neighborhood have. I think at times I believe I can speak for others, but I want to share some of the neighborhood concerns that we have with you. The first thing I want to bring up is the way that the neighborhood sentiment has been characterized. As LaDon Christensen mentioned, it's the way that this current structure is set up is not does not help in terms of citizen input to, say, the work meetings. You have the staff come and speak to you, and you have other people who are proposing things, but you don't have a nice avenue for citizen involvement in those. So I went back and looked at the last work meetings where this issue had been raised. Some of the wording that was used to characterize the neighborhood sentiment is that there had been multiple neighborhood meetings, this was in 2017, that there had been a negotiated settlement between the neighborhood, the school district, and Provo City. If you look at the most recent work meeting that took place January 23rd, 2018, you would come away with the impression that although neighborhood concerns had been raised, now the neighborhood was behind, had no objections to the surplusing of the land. That's the impression you would get from that. And that's because of the way I think that this has been set up as a discussion with the neighborhood. Because I've attended some of these smaller neighborhood meetings and I've attended some of the larger neighborhood meetings. I've tried to attend all the neighborhood meetings. And so let me give me an example of a meeting that I attended that was a small scale meeting where we were invited in with the superintendent as well as the mayor. At the time it was Mayor John Curtis. And the reasons for, as were given here, Title IX reasons, LWCF reasons, were given to us. It was just 5 residents at this meeting, and said, so here's all the concerns that we have, so this is the plan, this is what we're going to do. So here's the plot, a plot that was somewhat of this. Now, we'd like to get your input on this. Where would be a good place for the pavilion? Where would you prefer a field here, or what kind of things would you want here? And to me, that was ignoring, we were never asked after the case was made, as the interest was shown both of the school district and the city, we were never asked at this time, do you support selling the land to the school district? That was never asked to us. Instead it was asked, where would you like the pavilion? And to me, that's a second order concern, that you'd want to first ask, does the neighborhood support this? To me, I've given the analogy before, it's like asking someone, would you like your car stolen from home or from the office? And I can certainly answer that question, just like I can answer the question of where I would like the pavilion and whether I'd like a soccer field or a softball field. But it misses the main concern about whether we'd want the park sold in the first place, and then finding out where we'd put things. So I went and tried to acquire as much data as I can on this issue. That is every meeting that I've attended, even meetings that I've heard of, and every place that there was an opportunity for public input on this, whether it was a small scale meeting. So going all the way back to a 2016 meeting that took place with the mayor at someone's house, I went and I also looked at that meeting that 5 people attended. I looked at the Edgemont Elementary School meeting that took place. I looked at the neighborhood meeting that just took place at Legacy, and the Open City Hall. These are the only places that I've been able to find, and I acquired all the data and looked, what are the comments, what do they say? And the overwhelming majority in every one of these meetings is that the neighborhood is opposed to selling the park. Sometimes it's 100%. Sometimes, for instance, in Open City Hall right now, 74% of the people that have commented on Open City Hall are opposed to the sale of the park. If you look at the Edgemont Elementary School meeting, which is the other large-scale meeting, of the public comments that were stood up and said, 70% were opposed to the sale of the park. As elected officials, I'm sure you realize that 70% is an overwhelming majority. You would be happy to be elected with 70% of the vote. So the first thing I want to make sure you understand is that by every metric that I can find, the neighborhood opposes the sale of the park. Even with the interlocal agreement, even with all these things, these concessions that are given, they still would prefer that you not sell the park. So now I've been asked several times to think about this from a general city perspective. And as a neighborhood resident, sometimes I find the reasons that are given a little wanting. So we're told that the major concern from the school district perspective is Title IX. Now, if I had a Title IX concern in terms of a softball field, the first thing I would not do is get rid of the existing softball field. So that's why it's a little strange from the residents' perspective to think, you have the softball field. Why would you get rid of this when if this is your primary concern, Title IX? And then sometimes the reasons seem to shift a little bit more. Well, what we really need is the space, and we need the space that's adjacent. As a graduate of East High School in Salt Lake City, another city school that is dealing with space issues, they've dealt very well with finding space where they can that's not necessarily adjacent. And so I played my soccer games in fields that were not adjacent to the school, walked there, and it worked out fine. When you have a city property, that's what's going to happen. The main concern that's raised from the city perspective is the LWCF. That is, we're out of compliance. So as Parks and Recreation in the city is aware, we've called at times the states to find out what would you need to do to get back into compliance. Because when you find that you're not, I'll give another analogy of a car. If your car's not passing inspection, the usual approach is not to decide to sell the car. It's just usually to try to figure out, what do I need to do to bring the car back into compliance? If I have a broken taillight, what do I need to fix? Unless you have something better where you just are looking for a reason to go buy an upgraded car, you wouldn't get rid of the car. You try to figure out, well, what can I do? And what needs to happen, according to the state officials, is that you can't have exclusive use by the school of the property. That when it's open for both public use and school use, then it's in compliance. That's the main thing. You can't cede complete control of the baseball field to the school district. And once you do not cede complete control to the school district, then you are, as far as we can tell, back in compliance. So why would you go and sell the park when it's a relatively low-level fix, as opposed to this drastic action of selling a 50-year-old legacy park that you've promised to keep in perpetuity? Now, again, I've been thinking about this, trying to think about this from a city perspective. Think about it, you have this land here and you might get some other land here and you can move things around. You have to think about it from the school perspective. And the thing that's difficult for me from the city perspective is that I don't have all the information available to be able to make that decision. One of the things I would want to know before deciding to surplus the land is I'd want to know, what does the environmental assessment say? And either it's not done, or you have it and we don't, in which case you should share it, or you should wait until you know what the environmental assessment says. I would want to know what your replacement land is before I decide I'm going to put this on, one step closer to selling this piece of land. Now, maybe you know that. Maybe that's what took place in these closed-door meetings that determined what's the property you're going to buy on the west side and what kind of development are you going to make there. But you can't ask us to take that perspective unless you share that information with us. And if you don't have that information, I don't see why you're voting at this time to surplus the land if you don't have the full information at this time in terms of the environmental assessment and what your replacement property is going to be. As people have pointed out, you can surplus the land later. You can take it off surplus, but this is a very important step that you're taking, whether to surplus the land or not, because once you take this step, then it's just one more to selling the land. Now, I appreciate the opportunity that we've had to share this information, to share our neighborhood concerns with you. I hope that you take them into consideration this evening as you vote whether to surplus the land or not. Thank you.
Is there anyone else, Dave, is there anyone else that would like to speak to this item? Dave?
Before we go on, I just wanted to commend Mr. Goodliff for maximizing the usage of his 10 minutes. That was remarkable.
Okay, thank you very much for coming tonight. I know this is very dear to your heart, and I appreciate you coming forward and expressing your concerns. And this is important, and I thank you very much for being here tonight. We will now close the public portion of this meeting, and we will bring it back to the council for any discussion or questions that we might have. George.
Yeah, I've got a long list, so I'll do one at one and then maybe ask some questions later. But I am curious to know, and I guess it would be from the Parks and Rec people about this issue of the environmental assessment, because we haven't seen anything, and I don't know much about it. I mean, I know that this land is sensitive. I know that it's runoff area. I know that there's a berm there that's artificial because of the 1983 flood. And so I'm curious to know both what we know in terms of the assessment, because I saw on that slide that a portion of it had been completed. I'd also like to know what is the timing on this, and maybe Brian has an answer to this too. I don't know, but if we're being asked to vote to surplus this tonight, but we don't know what the environmental impact of it would be, is there a point at which we would be able to retract the surplus because the environmental assessment tells us something that we don't like? I mean, I'm asking in ignorance here about the process, and I just want to understand why it's not now that we're looking at that and why it seems to be later.
I'll address some of this. We also have our consultant here who is helping us, Mr. Ron Clegg, with this environmental assessment. The environmental assessment, because again it's federal, they have to look at the environmental conditions of this site that's being converted, as well as a potential replacement site. There are several factors that they look at. Cultural, there's historic. If there's anything historic on the site that needs to be preserved, those are all, serious, matters, and that need to be resolved before, the property, and before the conversion process would be approved. Again, and I don't think I was very clear, and I will be clear, be clear now. Again, the sale of this property is contingent upon the conversion process, the environmental assessment being approved. There is a public process, there's a public comment period on the environmental assessment when it's complete. The reason why we haven't released it yet is because it's not a complete draft. I mean, it's not reviewable at this stage. Again, surplusing is a part of this process.
So, but what I was hearing in some of the comments is the possibility of the sale happening before the environmental assessment is released.
No, the sale cannot happen.
Cannot happen.
Cannot happen until the environmental assessment is approved and the conversion process is approved.
And the approval involves public input and the city council review of the assessment?
Correct.
Okay.
Again, surplusing the property does not put it up for sale. It's just a part of the process that we're going through.
Okay.
Ron, do you want to add some more comment to that?
Well, while he's coming out, let me just add one thing, Mr. Handley, in response to your question. And again, I'm not sure where this language came from, but the current draft of the resolution says, the real property is described in attached Exhibit A is hereby placed on the surplus property list, and the mayor is authorized to negotiate concrete terms for the proposed sale with Provo School District, subject to final approval of those terms by the council at a future hearing.
Yeah.
So the action that's on the table tonight doesn't result in any final action. Even the terms of the sale agreement would have to come back to the council for a future hearing as currently written in the resolution.
And the terms also include everything on what an interlocal agreement would say.
Correct.
And that also has to get vetted by the public.
Correct.
So I'm Ron Clegg, and I'm working with Provo School District and Provo City to prepare them, to help them through this process. As I sit and listen, it sounds like this is a done deal. This is not a done deal. We still have a year to go. We're compiling the draft environmental assessment, and the reason it's not out for public review is we don't have all the information yet. So all it would do is create a bunch of confusion. We have quite a bit of information about the existing park. We still have to collect quite a bit of information, probably more information, about the replacement park, or replacement property. It has to be equal in dollar value, so the replacement site has to be equal $2 million worth of land. If it's cheaper land, then you're going to end up with more acreage. If it's more expensive, you'll end up with less. So here's the places the public can comment anywhere along this. They will comment on the draft document, which is out for public review for 30 days. That's when you can see the whole picture. Now, if we've overlooked something in that document, certainly we want them to comment on that. But it's a little unfair to make decisions without all the information. I agree with that. So we've kind of want people to wait till that draft document's out to fully understand. I'm not an expert on this surplus issue. But so the comments come in from the draft document. We have to address those. We submit this to the state person, who's Susan Zara-Carisi. She has to review it and feel like it's adequate. Then there'll be a final environmental document prepared that gets submitted to the National Park Service, and they have to feel like all the issues have been properly addressed to allow a conversion to take place. Now, if they don't, then none of this is going to happen, or we have to fix it. You can't buy the land, you can't do any of that stuff till this is approved. And so we've tried to make it clear that all of this surplus, or whatever it is contingent upon the approvals of this process, which is still around a year away. And so the input tonight's valuable. It will go into telling the story of all this, but there will be more information as we go on. We get more information every day. So any questions for me?
Can I speak to that on why surplus for the school district's point? I think it's helpful that it's lovely to be in a community that cares about things. That's why we have good schools. That's why we have a good community. And everything that you have heard tonight is true. There was nothing that Jay said that is not true. There's nothing, any of the public comment has said is not true. The reason the school district is interested in a surplus is that by the LWCF, there's a 30-day comment period, which meant that we could have all got together in closed session. You can discuss real estate in closed session. Come to basically an agreement, presented that, had 30 days, and sold it. We would prefer that it became, that we brought it forward to in the surplus area so that there is a long process of public input, not 30 days only. We wanted to bring it forward. What Mr. Clegg is also correct is we don't know if this is going to happen. That is absolutely correct. The school district is not counting on this property. We're looking what can be investigated. We'd like to investigate, and we'd like to investigate in public. We'd like to look at it in public. When those things, when the selection of a remediation property, we'd like that to be public. When there's a new appraisal, because our current appraisal of $2 million is going to expire. When that appraisal happens, we'd like that to be public. When the environmental things happen, we'd like that to be public. We wouldn't want to hold that environmental things, discuss all those things in closed meeting, which we can do. We wanted all of those things in public. We wanted people to know that what was in consideration. And so that this could be a long process of input. And there are many things in between here and there that the interlocal agreement has to be agreed by both you and the school district. The school district people could say, for that price, we can't have these restrictions, no deal. That could happen. The appraisal could go up, and that could be. There are many things. We're looking for the best thing for the whole community. And part of that is all those things about green space that they say and maintaining. That's absolutely true, and keeping that and remediation of this. If the recreation department wants to manage and share the property like they do in some other locations, that's also true. That's not how that is practically worked.
there's only one idea that gets actually more green space to the city. And that's if we can come to an agreement here and coming up with an instrument, as Mr. Sandberg said, if an easement, the only thing I know we have to be careful with is you have to pay Yellow Book, or we have to pay Yellow Book appraisal, and you have to sell it for that. If there are deed restrictions or easements or other things that affect that appraisal, we're worried about the conversion, then it doesn't happen anyway. And so it's not an unwillingness to say, oh, I don't think this is going to be green space forever. We want to provide as much green space as we can to the city, and we're looking at that. It's not the primary interest of the school district for the other piece of green space. We're interested in taking care of our students. That means that we want to do the best we can for our students. That means they have a place to play, and your assurance is to say, oh, we have a place to play. That'll be great. We'd like to do that and provide the best solution to the city. And however that process works out would be great. We would like that to be in public, which means people are engaged because there's a surplus vote. It isn't a sale vote, it's a surplus vote. And we're happy with that's come forward in the timing and the place that it has in the process. Thank you.
George, and then Dave.
Mr. Attorney, got a question for you.
Yes, sir.
The reason we discuss real estate transactions in closed session is to not have an escalation of the price. My understanding is I wouldn't be happy about revealing what property we're looking at buying with this money, because we're gonna have to pay more for it if we do it in public, right? Am I missing something?
Yeah, correct. Under state law, the criteria for talking about real estate transactions in closed session is that doing so in public would either reveal the appraised value or would somehow otherwise unfairly impact the terms of the deal by disclosing the details too early and subjecting the buyer or the seller to unwarranted competition.
So asking us to reveal what land we would take would just cause the price to rise, and we'd get less land for the money we have. So I think you would have to trust the council and the Parks Department that if we're buying land at the best price that we can get it, and it has a value to the city as a whole.
Dave?
That answered my question.
Ron, I have a question. One of the things that concerns of the neighborhood is that all the appropriate options have been looked at and determined that this is probably the best option.
Yeah, we will, that is.
Who determines whether that's been appropriately looked at?
The National Park Service.
The National Park Service is one.
But I hope we all agree, you agree, the public agrees, before it gets to the National Park Service, that's been done adequately. That's our job, is to put that in the environmental assessment and evaluate that. I think we've learned some things tonight that maybe haven't been considered about, those will have to be disclosed and looked at in the document about scheduling and who schedules what and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, that has to be disclosed.
So options, we still are looking at options. We are not closing off options, I guess, is one of the things that I know that the neighborhood is concerned about. Are we looking at other property? Are we looking at opportunities to house the softball field and the practice fields? Have those been adequately vetted and looked at?
We are going. No, that's again is the purpose of this process. We're looking at all of the options and what is going to be the best for this situation. Again, we can't every land and water conservation fund grant, property is not a cookie cutter. And that's why we're, again, vetting this process through this environmental assessment. Again, the public will be allowed, they'll be allowed to look at, how we've assessed the options that are available, and they can definitely chime in and provide their comment and input in that process. And that's being done tonight, and it will be done. There's other public hearings that we are required to have to vet out the process.
And that's the question, I guess it's the ultimate question is, who decides what's been appropriately vetted? I may think that one option is better than another option. I don't know, as a council member, I probably get a pretty good opportunity to weigh in on that. But has the neighborhood had the opportunity to, they still may disagree.
Right.
And it's important for them to recognize, I don't think this is the best option, but what's important that you guys have looked at that option.
Absolutely. Again, casual discards of property, not part of Land and Water Conservation Fund. And we definitely agree with that. And again, this is not a casual process that we're going through. And I just know that, it's not going to please everybody. And I think we can all agree with that. It's not going to please everybody, but I think we'll come to what the best solution will be, for this situation.
Question. Got a question for you. Title IX. Seems like the non-compliance is that we've given the baseball field for the use of baseball to the school, right? That's a non-compliance issue?
Correct.
So if we did the same for the softball team, gave them their field, which they want, would be just further out of compliance.
Correct.
So the suggestion tonight was, why don't we share the land with the softball team also? That's really exacerbates our problem.
I think it does too. There are risk issues. I mean, again, in an ideal world, if there wasn't any risk associated with it, there are risk issues that need to be taken into consideration with exclusive use of the baseball field, with exclusive use of the softball field. And I know that there are those definite risk assessments and risk issues that the school needs to adhere to.
Because the football team has their football field, baseball, they have a baseball field, the basketball team has a basketball field. I'd be thinking nice if the softball team had the softball field. So it seems like to me sharing it with the city causes additional potential problems.
Yes, I think so.
Causing problems right now with the baseball field.
And if McKay, you want to address that as well?
So I'm just trying to bring up it's nice for the public to make suggestions, but sometimes they don't work.
Right. I mean, and your instinct is our concern. In practicality with the baseball field, I know that it was built there with the best of intentions. I can almost always speak for the goodwill of the people of Provo doing good things. But in practicality, the baseball team has said, that's ours. And we're protecting it, and we're getting it ready for our season. And people have been denied, and there comes a cost to the city. And we're trying to look at the best remedy for that. But sharing it is problematic. That was in fact true with the Edgemont softball field. So with Mr. Goodliff, with Jay saying, you shouldn't have taken out their existing didn't meet. It wasn't a competition field. The fences weren't long enough, and people were bringing up, while it was there, Title IX to say, you need to provide us an adequate field. This is not it.
Yeah, it seems like to me a shared field would not be adequate.
Yes.
At least that's what I'm hearing the softball team say.
Yes.
I just want to point out, I know there's been some discussion about there's several places where there's shared public and school district property. This is a little unique in that this has that Section 6F designation on it, which means that it has to be used for the public. It was put there for the public use. Now, can you address that with some scheduling stuff? Maybe. But it's not like just a regular baseball field on a regular park. And I think a lot of these places we're referring to where that's happening, that's sort of the situation. But that is not the situation here.
Thank you.
Follow up to what you're saying there, who will determine, I read it one way, somebody else might read it another way. Who will ultimately determine?
The state will render a judgment, and then they'll recommend it to the National Park Service. The National Park Service administers that money through the state. The state disperses it to the local entities.
Have they already said that we're out of compliance based on the agreement we have with the baseball team?
No, because there's some confusion about how much the the property is being used by the.
But it's an issue.
Yeah, well, they think, that Susan thinks that it's only used a couple of months for the school and that the public has access to it all the rest of the time. But from what I understand, that's not the case, so.
Mr. Connect.
Okay, so what is the real problem? Liability? Or is the public going to damage the field? Why is the public not allowed?
I don't know the answer to that one.
For the most part, so Mr. Benoos flying the kites in the outfield, I think is not against district rules. It certainly wouldn't I hope no one has called. We have in the past we've had a settlement on a player that was injured on a soccer field at Fox Field. It was not properly maintained. So that's why we maintain our baseball field and why we try to keep it as a competition field and as good as it can be. That means actually giving the grass some rest so that we don't schedule and dimensions. We don't schedule the local softball tournament there because the dimensions is for baseball. We haven't put temporary fences for softball, which would most likely be the community use. It's for 60 feet 6 inches from the top of the mound. It's a permanent mound to provide the best experience for our baseball players, not a temporary mound, so that we prevent injury. They are protective of it, but not so much that it's not available for flying kites. For other competitions or tournaments, it has not been scheduled except for Timpview High School. Timpview High School is and the city has graciously said, this is how this has worked out. It's the practicality, and they've allowed that. But it's your ground, so there is room to change the rules, but it's not how it's worked out practically. The same with the lower part. Our football team runs up and down those hills that the kids sled on during the winter when it snows. We'd like to keep those sledding hills. We'd like to be able to use those for the football team as well. But we'd like to, if we're going to indemnify our athletes and say, be at risk for their injuries, we'd like to have, full maintenance and say that's our ground. And take responsibility for it.
Let me just ask you, so it's your view that it's better for the student athlete to have his own school-owned field because you have more control?
We would be able to say these are our maintenance records,
Right.
Without subpoenaing somebody else. We could say this is how often it's taken care of. This is what it's done. Part of the interlocal agreement certainly could be where the fence is. Certainly, that's going to be a term of negotiation. We'd probably want to, if we're going to use it for soccer practice, we'd probably want to put a fence around the kiddie playground. No gate. That would be part of the interlocal agreement. If the neighbors want additional fencing, that would be great. If they don't want additional fencing, that would be great. That would be part of the interlocal agreement we have to come to. We're doing our best with a complicated history of trying to serve our public. Our Dixon tennis courts are open to the public. We provide parking for Sertoma Park that the city uses. We have a relationship. We'd like to maintain that relationship. We just know that this is an ongoing cost to the city. If they're willing to bear that cost, that doesn't seem quite fair to me on the rest of the city. But we recognize that there's going to be limitations and cooperation on this ground, no matter what.
Okay, just a second, I'm not done. It just was brought up tonight that it's strange that the school district and city can't share. To me, there are good reasons why you can't share. And
Yes.
That doesn't mean you couldn't share, but there's reasons why the school district would want not to share and have dedicated facilities for its dedicated athletes, dedicated sports.
More than that, if it's a public park and a public pavilion and someone is sitting on the park and is not, we know that they're not scheduled there and somebody's just sitting on the bench, we'd like a legitimate reason to approach them. Why are you here? If it's a public park, if it's a student that's been expelled from our campus and they're adjacent to campus waiting for their friends, we're not really allowed to ask. They're entitled to the park. If we'd like to read, that doesn't mean we're gonna throw mom off, but we would certainly, for all the concerns. Today, because of the news, I've gotten multiple calls and emails about how do we secure our various elementary school campuses. We would like to be able to walk up and say, why are you here, legitimately. That might be an irritant to some people. I think that we'll, for the most part, we'll get to know the neighbors. But if it's our student, it's a 17-year-old, and and they're not in class, we'd like to know why they're in the pavilion. And that's a reason why we wouldn't share. If it's the city park and we just share that, we don't really have a legitimate reason to ask.
Apart from the fact this is a city park right now, I think there's good reason, at least in my mind, for the school district. If I was on the school district board, or if I was on the administrative school district as a coach, I would want dedicated facilities that aren't city parks, personally. So that begs the issue of whether we should give up a park to do that.
Yes.
But at least it's reasonable to assume that the school district is within its rights, and it's not unreasonable to want separate facilities.
I would agree.
Thank you.
George.
Sorry, McKay, I have more questions for you, sorry. First, it's just a comment on both what I've heard tonight. I've talked to Jay and LaDon and Frank and Steve and many other people who are here tonight, and I'm always willing to continue those conversations. And so, I mean, I'm new to this whole conversation since I was not on the city council before January, but I certainly have been very impressed with the quality of input I've had from the community, and I just want to continue to encourage that, and if there are ways that we can improve that process, I'm eager to improve it, because I think we make better decisions when we're better informed. But I sit on the other side of this as a city council member now, and I can say that I know our Parks and Rec staff are honest. I know the school district is honest. I think these are all well-meaning people who are trying to serve the community well. I don't see any underhanded dishonesty going on here. So I think we're all. I just want to sort of beg for trust enough to believe that we're speaking the truth when we're speaking tonight. I feel very strongly about that. There are three things that I feel like I've heard from the community when I've asked some of the people who've spoken to me, that if there was really solid assurance on, then this wouldn't be such a difficult or controversial thing. That's not to say everyone would be pleased with it, but it does seem to me that most of the concerns about open space are extraordinarily passionate, and they're dear to everybody's heart, and I think we can all agree that we shouldn't lose open space. This is not being proposed as a proposal to lose open space. It's being proposed as a change of the identity of an open space, but still preserving its character as an open space. And then, of course, the location of an alternative land that's going to be purchased. I haven't heard any of the comments from the community about the proposal the Parks and Rec gave about the Northwest Park, whatever Canyon Park you were calling it, because I would be interested to know their feelings about that. But that said, if this interlocal agreement can't, well, first of all, I want to know what kinds of assurances or what kind of tools do we have at our disposal to make sure there is no building on this property, that the Timpview will not suddenly relocate its building on the south end of the property. That's my first question. The second one is the access, and the third one is maintenance. You know, can the school district maintain there, because there has been accusation that the school district doesn't maintain its property as well as the city does, and there's concern, of course, about random well-meaning administrators at local schools putting up fences and locks when that's not policy. So I'd like to hear your address those three.
So, the first one, sort of future use of the property and the strength of interlocal agreements. Again, we're worried about the conversion process has to happen or it's not an option at all. So we're worried about the appraisal. So, and then there are certain restrictions that the school district is in regarding deed restrictions. Easements, we'll need to research. Going forward, and the strength of interlocal agreements. This is one thing I can tell you about the strength of the interlocal agreement. Mr. Goodliff is right that it's unfortunately that not everything can be in the public view, but we do have, and I was corrected in another meeting, we have a 40-year-old school that's going to need some work. The footprint of that school is going to be determined largely, while at least the majority of you and me are still serving the public. It will be very difficult for us to forget an interlocal agreement that not just is written down, but that we personally participated in. Because those changes to that footprint, which which will be necessitated by the age of the building, by the regular change of our inventory, are going to happen, and they're going to happen sooner rather than later. So as far as an interlocal agreement getting dusty and not really applying, I know that interlocal agreement is going to go into the very planning of what that school is going to look like, which is actually underway. Beyond that, strength of an easement, we'd have to find out.
Is that possible after an interlocal agreement has been, or after the sale of the property that the school, as Steve was suggesting, places?
It would certainly be appropriate prior to a sale, because you would be asking us, and a school board is fickle, as these people show. School boards change. Who's on it? Who's going to go it? Why would we've purchased it? It's ours. Why would we put an easement on our own property? It seems like in the transfer of the property, that would be the best time that should happen for the public. I mean, for the public good.
But does that affect the price?
That comes at a price.
I mean, the actual price, the Yellow Book price.
You're going to have to ask the real estate professionals beyond the amateur school board member.
Okay.
But that would be our concern, or would be a red flag, that the dollar value for mitigation would go down, or if it doesn't count as Yellow Book appraisal anymore. That would be things that would be very important to go into. At the same time, that would go into the decision of the school board to, in fact, purchase the property. Our school board is committed to looking into the best use of this property for the community, but again, they will have to vote. There's an easement on the property. Certainly with the well, we know of one easement already. Beyond that, they would have to decide, and they might say no. And so, but is it worth investigating? Yes. And do I believe that they should demand the strongest instrument and you should find the strongest instrument? Yes, that's your role. The city has, as was stated over and over, an intergenerational desire for green grass. And that, in my one-person opinion, is a valuable thing as well. And we should work towards that, and that's with strong agreements. Oh, so there were two other questions, sorry. So that's future use. So access. You know, I'm learning more and more about access problems. We have better places and better in other parts of the neighborhood. One thing that I think that is really valuable is I hope people learn that they can come and ask. the access to our track is not contingent upon the sale of this property. That's going to be open. Access to our tennis courts is not going to be contingent. Access to the Edgemont Elementary playground equipment is not going to be contingent. So there are people that are nervous about what state risk management, which insures us, says. We're working with them and providing every access that we can. We're changing the signage as of today to match other school districts that give hours and say this is when this is available and this is where you get in. And this is, in fact, public property, which school district property is. And so we know we have a long way to go in working on that, and we're doing that. And the history is varied, but I hope that you'll allow us to change that history and come right to where we should be. The third, so access maintenance. The school district has over 200 acres of grounds that they maintain. We're very professional. It's not an amateur hour of that. We maintain some areas. We maintain a children's playground on top of Grandview Hill where there is not an elementary school anymore, but there is a children's playground that the neighborhood came accustomed to. It's still there. We maintain it. And the same with many of the soccer fields on top of Grandview Hill. They're open green space to the public that have access to it. We do work with the city to say what soccer leagues play on these fields. We do, the city, we will field complaints to say there's a team playing on the soccer field and they're tearing it up in the mud, and we'll work with the city to say when that is appropriate to say, you can't just, I don't know of a family that's been asked to leave. I know of an organized sports team that said you didn't schedule this properly, that's been asked to leave. But if they schedule a property, which after hours, all of our school property are scheduled through the city because the recreation department has the ability for people to call and schedule. That's how we work. We work together already. They've made the agreement to say nobody could schedule that green space in deference to the neighborhood to make it more accessible to the neighborhood than a regular city park where they would go, oh, youth soccer, I know it's not a competition field for an adult soccer league, but we could put the junior soccer there, but they've already made the commitment not to do that. But it would be done by the city just as the rest is done right now.
Mine was just a general comment, actually, and I would be eager to know the community's understanding of that property, as the proposal that the Parks and Rec people said. That's what I was alluding to.
So,
oh,
we will continue to pursue the best venues that we can for our athletes to play. There's a great contingent of, you can see the Timpview softball coach in the back that's sporting our colors is here for the support. We want a great facility for them. We will work that facility wherever we best can. The recreation department says we have a park that has shared use, and it turns out we've come up with some problems. It doesn't seem advisable to create a second shared park that has shared use. That maybe we could come up with one that's the schools, one that's the cities, and some of those problems that have been identified here wouldn't arise a second time. But we're looking for the best solutions that we can, and the comment that these things are shifting, yes, they're shifting because we're looking for the best idea. And where things land in the end comes from a good process, and we're grateful for your part in that.
Real fast one, make one real fast question. But it would be desirable to have it adjacent to the school if possible, right?
Absolutely. People are interested in where our students are, what shelter there is. If someone with bad intent comes to the school and goes, where could they have gone? I would really like to give a better answer that said, well, they could run to their cars. I would like them to be able to use their locker rooms. I would like them close to the training facilities. Certainly there's interest in the school district and to have it adjacent to the school.
If my daughter was playing softball, I would want it there.
Yes.
Just like when she played basketball or when my son played football, they were right there at the school. So I
Yes.
think it's, I appreciate the neighborhood's desire to maintain a park, but also I think they had to also consider the needs of the students who are also citizens of the city to have access to a facility to play their sport at the school.
Yes.
Mr. Harding.
I'd like to echo Mr. Henley's comment about the quality of input. I've been impressed with that as well. There have been a few comments about public input throughout this evening, and I was keeping track, at least early on, the presentation by the departments, and the school district was 30 minutes. We had 54 minutes of public comment, but since then we have heard a lot more answers from our organizations. And having been on both sides of the dais, the procedure is not completely equal, but I don't know if any council member feels like there's been a lack of public input or a lack of opportunity for citizens, residents to make their opinions known to the council. Occasionally there are items that I think fly a little bit below the radar. I don't think that this item has flown beneath the radar, and there are a number of opportunities to let your opinions be known outside of open city hall and outside of public comment portions, and having heard from many of you, I'm confident that you know some of these other opportunities to share your input. A comment was made about how this proposal reduces the quality of life, and at least at the face value, I have a hard time seeing how this reduces the quality of life. But for that to happen, some of the promises that are being made will need to be maintained. And I think Mr. McKay, Mr. Jensen. Jacobson. Jensen. Bright lights, it's, oh man, I struggle, I apologize. Mr. Jensen, I appreciate you talking about the need to be a better neighbor. And I just heard you talk about changing that history. I live across the street from an elementary school and down the street from a junior high, and as a neighborhood chair, we encouraged our neighbors to be good neighbors and to not have dandelions growing. And there's times where in the springtime at sunset, Dixon Field, at least in the past, has turned this beautiful, it's a field of gold as all of the dandelion heads turn gold with the sunset light, and it's absolutely beautiful. But it's really hard to tell the residents there, hey, be sure to pull your dandelions when the school at times hasn't always been the best neighbor. You talk about the professional maintenance crew. It seems every year during this Christmas break, we'll get some big snowstorms there, and the sidewalks aren't cleared, and by the time school starts, it's 3 inches of solid ice. And but at the same time, I think our school district, you have such an important mission to educate our children, and you're worried about no child left behind. And so sometimes some of these public access to fields and things, it's a distraction, it's an annoyance, and you're focused on your mission. But I think right now you're very aware of how your relationship with the neighborhoods and where you're located really matters. And there's no question that you're genuine in your intent right now. The question is in 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, when there's not an immediate need, Are you, being the school district and whoever's the board chair at the time, is that still a priority for you? This is one area that I'm actually interested in with this interlocal agreement, because I don't believe any of those school policies of access and things, I don't believe there's ever been an interlocal agreement before. And so I think this memorializes some of this that I'm hopeful will force the district to at least not allow it to slip too much, and may improve that relationship, not just here if it goes forward, but throughout the whole district. As has been said earlier by others, I think most of us, if not all of us here, are big proponents of our public schools. We're very grateful for the quality education that our children receive under your care, and so thank you for that. A comment was made about building more green space. I do feel, I have to come back to, I really feel like this is a net positive in green space in a lot of ways. And I appreciate the parks proposal, the first time I've heard about it tonight, of accelerating the development of a park while not in Edgemont, but very.
It's in Edgemont.
Is it in Edgemont?
Yeah, just 2 blocks up, 2.5 blocks up.
It's in North Timpview, but it's the area, and so I do think this is a net positive in that aspect. One thing we have to understand, though, is green space costs money, and it has to be paid for some way or another, and often that is through taxes one way or another. And so it's easy to say yes, we want, but we also have to be willing to pay if that's going to be sustainable. Last comment, just general, and it was touched on a little bit, so I'll be really brief on this, but the scheduling. If it's done by the city or the school or whatever, I guess my concern is that there's been this thought of, well, we won't allow scheduling, and maybe that was for the fields, and because I heard earlier a comment about scheduling the pavilion, so can it be scheduled? Can it not be scheduled? One thing I want to avoid, or one thing that I think it needs to be avoided, is I don't think it can only be scheduled by certain people. And so I think the community probably needs to decide if they want to allow scheduling or not. It sounds like the school's amenable to either one, but just understand that if scheduling is allowed, the city has to, or the school, I imagine, has to allow that scheduling for everyone on an equal basis. Thank you all for coming and for sharing your comments. And if we vote for this, it really is kind of the beginning of the next stage of this. And it sounds like we've got a long way to go and many more opportunities for public input. But thank you.
Okay.
There was an argument made early on by one of the citizens that regarding the well and the water quality in the watershed. I hadn't heard that argument before. Is anyone from Parks? I know no one from Public Works is here to address that, but yeah, Mr. Henderson, thank you.
I think we recognize the site has uses in, not just ball fields, but also wells. So that would probably be part of that interlocal agreement we've been talking about, is recognizing a valuable well that provides the water resource to our community. So in that area, I think it does go a little bit to McKay's comment that makes there's no desire to build because of the impact of those type of assets, but it also protects in the interlocal agreement that asset remains for the community also. Is that what you're asking, Kay?
Yeah, I didn't know if the danger was losing the well or the irrigation change would have an effect on it.
I'm sure Public Works, with any well, just like what they've done at Lyons, they are concerned about any development around that area and its impact on the quality of that well. I think it does lend down the road for what you're seeing on your screens is a site with very little change to make sure the integrity of that well is maintained.
Thank you, Scott.
Dave, go ahead. Dave, so we'll let you do that first. and then we'll go to Dave Connect.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mumford, could you bring up that web page on that link that I sent you? I just for the first time a few days ago had the opportunity to read through the Land and Water Conservation Fund conversion process. And I have to say, after reading that and carefully pondering it, I'm not prepared to vote in favor of this at this time. I'd like to walk through a couple of statements in here. At the very beginning, let's see, go down just a little bit. Starts section 6F3. Oh, maybe it was up at the top there. Yeah, there it is, right at the very top of the screen. Section 6F3 of the Land and Water Conservation Fund Act of 1965 requires all property acquired, developed, or improved with assistance from the LWCF grant program shall be retained and used for public outdoor recreation in perpetuity. And then in parentheses, it says forever. And there is a process outlined that there are circumstances when that might need to change, but now going down a little farther, it outlines that where it talks about, it starts a conversion of use of any 6F project. Well, I can read it if I think it might be down a little farther. Yeah, there it is right there under summary of the conversion. A conversion of use of any 6F project area should be avoided if at all possible. So this may well end up being the best situation all around, but I'm not convinced at this point in time that it cannot be avoided. Conversions of use must be approved. I'm not sure if this is the same paragraph here. Must be approved by the National Park Service, and they may refuse to grant approval for a conversion. So ultimately, the National Park Service, the way I read this, is going to determine whether this proposal is appropriate. And then here's another one that really hit home with me. I'm not sure where this is in here either, but all practical alternatives to the conversion must be evaluated and rejected on a sound basis. For me, I'm not sure that we've looked at all the practical alternatives and that all of them have been rejected on a sound basis. And here's another one that concerns me. The proposed property for replacement must be of reasonably equivalent usefulness and location as that being converted. And my understanding is that we're not able to even talk about the proposed location at this point. So I don't know how we have a good discussion about that paragraph at this point in time either. So in summary, I've been mulling over in my mind, when should the city sell a park when you have a room full of neighbors who love and use the park? What would be the circumstances where you'd want to do that? I've been here 4 years, and I think we've only sold one park that I can remember. That was the Ron Last Park, and Park Service told us that it really wasn't used much at all. There weren't surrounding homes. I don't recall if I got any emails objecting to that sale of that park. I don't recall anyone showing up to ask us not to sell that park. But this is obviously a very different situation here. And I think the fact that we're even talking about this sale at all is actually a compliment to the school board and to the value that we place on schools in our city. Because I'm having trouble coming up with another scenario where we would be talking about selling this park if it wasn't the school board asking for it to use for the benefit of our school. And that's very important. It's important to me. My daughter played on the Timpview softball team, by the way. and use that diamond across the street that apparently isn't there anymore. So one other thing that I've been mulling over is the idea of trust. That word has come up a few times. I think most of us, when we move into a neighborhood and we see a city park, sort of expect that it's going to stay there. And then here we have a seller and a seller's family that had a decision. They could sell the park, sell their land to the school district, or they could sell it to the city. And they made a deliberate decision to sell it to the city and specifically requested that it be used for a park, and the city agreed to that. So are we doing right by that family? And then furthermore, as has been pointed out, we went out and sought federal funds to purchase and develop, or I'm not sure if it was purchase or develop, but to use for some part of that park being, making that happen. And we knew what the conditions of using that money were, and we took the money from our United States citizens out there and used it for that purpose. And so as I read through this, I think we need to take this really seriously and make sure that we have really looked at all those alternatives and really are really comfortable that this is the very, very best before we would proceed to put this property on the surplus list. I also agree with School Board President's comment that we should look for the strongest instrument possible. I totally agree with that. And I think Mr. Sandberg mentioned that as well. I think we should look at an easement, a deed restriction, and I would like to have that discussion and understand what those options might be before we vote on surplusing the property. So thank you all for your patience, and that's how I'm feeling about this at this time.
We're going to go to Dave Connect. He wanted to first. So.
So I'm not comfortable at this point. Seems like we're looking at replacing one permanent agreement with another agreement that's supposed to be permanent. I'm not comfortable with that. Now, an interlocal agreement might be appropriate if we are the ones still owning the property. When it comes to scheduling and maintenance, I hear, you know, if the school district owns the property, that they'll let us maybe schedule the pavilion or different things. It works the other way too. If we own it, they can schedule, we work with them. Maintenance, for years, the city did all the maintenance, as I remember it, on the school district properties, and it was this unwritten interlocal agreement, which when I was on the council 15 years ago, we tried to get it in writing and couldn't, because it wasn't quite equitable and it would have cost the school district money. And that's just water under the bridge. I'm just saying that we can work together. We can either take care of their property, they can take care of our property, we can work together to make sure the property is maintained and is safe for the ball players and the public. If we can't work together on scheduling and maintenance, then we have a problem. And it really doesn't matter who owns the property if we can't do that. But I would just assume that we maintain the ownership and fulfill our obligations to the federal government and not do, as it says here, you know, this is a serious agreement we entered into years ago. And I think we can have the same outcome where we can meet the needs of both the school and of the public while we maintain ownership.
Oh, it's partly a question and then a comment. I guess maybe it's for the Parks and Rec people in light of Mr. Sewell's comments, because I'm still a little confused about process here, because I heard reassurances that we would examine all alternatives, and yet we're being asked to surplus the property tonight, and that's what's got me a little confused. I mean, I guess what I'm wondering is, if we were to take more time on this, if we were to say, I'm not inclined to vote one way or the other, actually, until I get more information. But if we have to vote, then I say, well, if I vote against it, then but it goes forward, I want to make sure that it still has all the strength and teeth in it that it needs to protect the space, to keep it open and public access and high quality and so on. But if we're going to be making that decision before we've actually exhausted all the alternatives, and then that doesn't seem right to me. But if we need a few more months to exhaust all those alternatives and come back and say, okay, now we want to consider this for surplus, was that envisioned in your process, or when you were saying that you were going to exhaust all those possibilities, how were you envisioning that?
Councilmember Handley, I think what you're describing is the process.
Okay.
You know, and in all deference to the website research on Land and Water Conservation Fund, this mitigation process does get to those answers. And why we're here talking about a surplus is, do you want to solve these problems? Do we want to go through the process of solving the problem, of which one may be the solution of a land sale? So there is much more, as was said so many times, about so much more public meetings and discussions about, you know, the nuances and the solutions and what the federal government would approve. We can replace the federal government in our decision making if we want here, and decide not to go forward, you know, with this process. But the mitigation process requires that there is some agreement of purchase and trade that goes forward with us. So the surplus, which by no means obligates anybody here to sell this area to anyone else, but it does show that we're willing to go down this process and work to the logical end and solution. I wish we could come here with every answer solved. You know, we try to do that an awful lot. But we're dealing with the federal government here, which is why we hired somebody like Ron Clegg, an outside consultant, to help guide us through this process. It's difficult, and there's a lot of elements to it. But that's not there now, and that's not here now. But if we would like to end this, that is completely within the council's purview. But we still, what we feel, have a non-compliance issue on land and water conservation, because that land was built to be Timpview's home field. That field was built for that.
So what's really paradoxical for me right now is that a vote against this means that we stop the conversation and we never get answers to some of these questions that I want answers to.
Yes, because it's really showing the intent that we're not going to go forward with, you know, that we would look at this as a possible option with the mitigation of this, the sale and mitigation of this land.
But if
Am I understanding that right, Ron?
We need to do something with the other land.
Right. So in the middle of this, you know, we're trying to find the mitigation property. If that doesn't happen, it's done then. There's a million things that could create this.
And if we vote in favor to surplus, I would be very strongly inclined to invite the interested parties here tonight and others to be at the table to go through every point on that interlocal agreement.
I think we're forced to do that.
And/or a conservation easement or whatever other tools are at our hand to make sure that they are happy with the outcome. And if they're not happy with it, then that steers me in a different direction. But I'd rather get that information. I'd rather go through that process thoroughly than to abort it prematurely. I mean, not prematurely is the wrong word, because I don't feel like anything is premature in this process. But I mean to say that without having all those answers.
I think that's what the federal process does. It is not a closed process. It has its own requirements set forth that you have to comply with as part of this.
Quick clarification. So if we were to vote to surplus this evening, there's no obligation to sell, it just, the process moves forward. If we vote not to surplus tonight, does that kill the process? Does the process die? Or could it still continue forward and then at some later date, when more answers are known, it would come back?
Well, that's quite a scenario. I think there's a lot of specifics within that scenario. We'll have to find about if we are non-compliant with our use and it affects, are we okay with not being able to procure federal funds for development of parks and trails and those type of elements. So, you know, if that part of it comes down later. So I think what it does tell us a little bit is it obligates you to nothing the way the surplus, having just gone through a green space surplus process with the council, you know, I realize that an agreement still has to come forward and do all that on another piece that we've talked about. But, you know, I think what it does is it allows the fact that we're willing to look at that option.
Let me ask that question a little bit differently. So it's based on that timeline. The thought is if a sale goes through, it would happen in the winter, fall, whatever, at the end of 2018. So if we were to vote not to surplus it tonight, would there be a time, is it possible to vote to surplus it as that got closer? Or if we vote no on the surplusing now, does that push it out, or does it, what is the downside?
It stops it, doesn't it?
And that's what I'm asking. Does it stop it, or does it just mean that it needs to be surplused at a later date?
I know the conversion process does require that there is a contingent deal in hand or an intent to be able to move forward with it, or most likely, because they wouldn't want to rule on a process or a contingent sale that does not exist, or a willingness from council that does not exist to go through this process.
Gary?
Mr. Stewart.
We're this far because in closed session, we indicated we wanted to go ahead with the process, not to sell the property, but the process to investigate selling the property. And to me, if we vote against that, then we've just made the decision different than we made, than we indicated to you in the closed session that we wanted to proceed with at least looking at surplusing the property and doing it. So in my mind, we're voting to stop the process if we vote against the surplusing.
Mr. Henley?
I hate to put the administration on the spot, but I'd love to hear from the mayor or Mr. Parker about this, especially our mayor's background in the school district.
Do you want to go first, Dwayne?
Well, let me just raise a couple of concerns. First of all, as you know, and as Ron's indicated, part of this process is not just about Timpkiwanis-Spanoose Park. It's also about the replacement property. And we are in negotiations relative to a potential replacement site. We're about ready to start putting some significant dollars into that process. Not only from a consulting standpoint, which is significant, but also in terms of tying up the property. We are not the only ones interested in that piece of property. And again, I guess our concern was if there's a desire to not consider this process, we don't want to start tying up earnest money and dollars in evaluation and review of utility costs and so on associated with a replacement property if the answer is going to be no. You're asking us to put some, six-figure dollars at risk now, if that's the case. And so, and just understand that the realities of the market today are, number one, price is never going to be lower than it is today. And secondly, the property in question or any replacement property may simply not be available when the time comes. So again, I think our concern is that if we continue to march down this path, we're putting some significant city capital at risk, which could just be lost. And so if the inclination is to not sell the property, we just as soon know that right now, if that's the case. Because again, we're starting to move forward on this. And again, the lack of a surplusing decision certainly puts a lot of this in question. Whether the administration will be willing to go out and commit hard-earned taxpayer dollars after a deal that's not likely to happen. And so again, that's the worry, and that's why we brought the surplusing to you now, is that we're getting into a position where we're going to have to start making some hard decisions. And it may be an easier decision to walk away. We put the school district at risk. We put our own selves at risk by not being in compliance currently with the current scenario with the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And we may end up with a problem for which there is zero solution in the near future. So it's a little bit of a chicken and egg thing. And we just need you to understand that there are ramifications to whatever you make a decision for tonight. And again, we're fine with whatever decision you make, but the inability to reach a decision, at least on an interim step, to give us some level of confidence moving forward, we may not move forward. So just want you to understand that that's part of the reason why it's a difficult call tonight.
And I echo exactly what Wayne says. And with that said, I listen to my city council. I love working with them, and I will support what they want to do. So the decision needs to be made at some point, but I will not put taxpayers' dollars into something that could not turn out a product that is worthy of their dollars, their hard-earned dollars. With that said, I'm just so impressed with the Edgemont neighborhood. 18 people spoke tonight, and Jay counts probably for 10, so we should say 28. And the fact that you got yourselves organized and got down here really means a lot. And I know a lot of your faces, and a lot of you have fed my kids, so thank you, Christensen's, and everyone that's here tonight. But that's the reason I ran for political office, was to hear from the constituents. And yet then I just feel like I'm being torn in a million pieces with a bunch of moving parts, because then I have McKay, who I was board president when we appointed him to the board, and I trust him. He's a wonderful man and full of integrity. And the fact that he's here tonight by himself addressing this without anyone else on the board is pretty impressive. So there's a lot of moving parts to this decision. But with that said, my two sticking points are, I'll support what you decide tonight. And the other one is, I will not put tax dollars money, I won't push it any further. I'm not going to waste your money to pursue this if it isn't a direction the city council is willing to vote on to go.
Mr. Sewell?
Just a point of clarification. I think this is pretty significant. If I understood this right, we're saying that this other unnamed project is dependent on the cash that we would get from the sale of this property. Did I hear that right? So we wouldn't go.
The whole reason we're doing this is to provide a place to put the conversion dollars. And again, as has been explained tonight, we're very limited in our choices. Can't be anything that's already been in a parks master plan, which again takes a lot of potential property out of the equation. And so we have a very limited range of choices in which to put these dollars. And so again, if there's no interest in doing the sale, then there's certainly no interest in us putting forth any more effort in trying to acquire an alternative parcel. But yeah, the placement of those conversion dollars is an important question. Again, we've got to have all those pieces together before we can complete the environmental assessment. It's an assessment on both components, not just one.
I think the administration's position is illustrated by this group right here. They want us to surplus the property for a variety of reasons. One, noncompliance. It has negative impact on the neighborhood, but it has positive impacts on the school district and the other parts of the city. It's just a choice. I wish I was Solomon and could make a Solomon's choice, but you just have to kind of pick a thing. And we've indicated in the past that we wanted the administration to go ahead as a council, not unanimously, no guarantee, but the reason we're here tonight is because in the past we said this looks like it would be favorable to the district. It impacts the neighborhood, absolutely it impacts the neighborhood. I feel for that, but I'm elected citywide. I'm trying to look out for the good of the city, citywide. And I think I hate to impact my friends, my neighbors, but sometimes that happens, particularly when it's positive for the district, it's positive for the Recreation Parks Department because it takes away a noncompliance issue. And we told them to, but in my mind, I agree with the administration. If we're not willing to surplus the property, then we're not going to be willing to sell it. If we surplus tonight, we should be saying if the terms are correct, if the terms are good, if the terms are fair, then we're going to be willing to sell the land. If we're not willing to sell the land, let's not surplus it. If we're not willing to consider selling it, we shouldn't surplus it.
Mr. Sewell.
So I guess I look at it a little differently. My initial feeling for wanting to encourage this to move forward in the beginning was to help our schools. I never saw this as a cash generator for another project, and so I'm actually not inclined to move ahead on that basis. I think if the other project is important enough, it should stand on its own merits, and that we should proceed with that independent of what we do with Benoist Park. That's my personal opinion.
Mr. Connect.
So spending six figures of taxpayers' money is a big deal, and tonight is that kind of moment where if you say yes and the money gets spent, then it's all the harder to say no later. It's like, if we're not serious, then let's not put it on surplus, just like you said, George. And but if we do put it on surplus and then we start investing money and more time into this process, it just makes it all the harder to ever say no down the line. So this is a real commitment here. It's like getting engaged. So I just would like to think that there's more to explore in the way of an interlocal agreement where instead of us being a guest on the property, the school district is the guest, and we work together, and that the neighborhood has confidence in the city. Obviously, they don't right now in the school district, and I don't know how to remedy that. And I just think that we should be able to work together, and if we maintain ownership of the property, if we can guarantee the maintenance and the security and the scheduling, then the outcome should be the same regardless of who's the owner.
Mr. Harding.
So really good comments. I appreciate them. I think this is a little bit like an engagement. I think it's a really good analogy. It suggests a level of confidence and earnestness in moving forward. But an engagement is not a marriage, and there's that period in which to further look into things, and if things don't work out, then engagements can be broken. We've talked about some of the fine details of, what is necessary for conversion and whatnot. I don't feel like that is something that we should be judging this on. I think we have some competent professionals that will do what's necessary, and I think it's up to the National Park Service to make those determinations. I think for us, the question is this overall in the best interest of the community? The people that live closest to it, that are most impacted, I think way more, but than the average Provo citizen. But I also think we need to weigh the interests of the whole of Provo as well, and look and balancing that. If it really doesn't matter who owns it, as long as it's properly maintained or properly managed, then if that's the case, then I think we need to be looking at outside of this property what happens, and I think that there are some major differences in who owns it as far as the outside is concerned. Also, I wanted, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Parker, but the comment wasn't, we would like to sell this so that we can fund another thing. It was, if we sell this in order to fix our compliance problems and the district's Title IX problems, we have to put that money somewhere, and we haven't identified a good candidate, and we can do that. So I think it's a horse and cart thing, and I think that the point is we have these immediate problems, but in order to resolve them, we have to put this $2 million somewhere, and we have very limited candidates, and one has been identified. And so I at least don't feel like we're being asked to sell this in order to fund something else. So thank you.
George?
Mr. Connect, ideally what you're saying is true, but it doesn't work for the school district. If we own the property, it puts us in non-compliance with the kind of way we bought the property to try to coexist. They need to have property that they control, and we need to have property that they control, or we're in non-compliance. So, I mean, to say it would be nice to have our ownership but still have the teams there, that's not gonna happen. It doesn't work. It doesn't work for our compliance, and it doesn't work for the school district to have exclusive property for their teams. But anyway.
I guess that's the question, is whether exclusive control by the school district is totally necessary. And I know that that's what they want. Seems like currently they're using some other fields temporarily that we own and they are using. So I'm just not convinced. Yeah.
Mr. Henley?
Well, I'll go back to what I was saying before. I mean, I certainly have a lot of questions that need to be answered, and I think the LWCF issues have to be resolved, and they're not at present. But I think by surplusing the property, I feel like I have a great confidence in the community here, and I think that we could work out, I mean, in the meantime, finding out whether or not we find an adequate property, whether or not we have exhausted all the alternatives and met the standards of the LWCF. That all needs to be addressed, and I'm perfectly willing to pull my support if at any point it doesn't seem like we're meeting those needs or meeting the needs of the neighborhood here. But I'm kind of gambling on the thought that the school's needs and the neighborhood's needs can be met simultaneously with a really strong interlocal agreement and or a conservation easement of some kind that protects the property from the kinds of things that the neighborhood's very concerned about. So I do think it seems to me to be worth the investigation, but I just want to make it clear that I'm not inclined to vote because I've already decided that I want to sell the property, and I'm pretty clear, I think, in my mind now that that's not what I'm being asked to decide at this point. I'm being asked to decide whether or not it's worth continuing to investigate the possibility that we can meet the needs of the school district and meet the needs of the community simultaneously. And if we can't, then we can't. But if we can, I do think that's a scenario that I think can please all the interested parties.
Is there any other comments at this point? Again, thank you for all your comments and your participation here. And Mr. Jensen, I do really respect you being here. I don't know if you were invited or if what your situation is, but you have been a great asset in answering questions, and I know this has not been easy for you. I appreciate you being here for us. At this point, with no other comments, I guess we have the opportunity to look for a motion. Oh, we do have an implied motion. Thank you. There is an implied motion on this, unless there is any other discussion. Thank you. I will read this implied motion. It's to pass a resolution to place approximately 12.33 acres of real property generally located at 3278 North Timpview Drive on the surplus property list. There is an implied motion for that. Is there any other discussion regarding that or any changes that would need to be made to that implied motion? If not, then I'll call for a vote. Those in favor, please indicate. Those opposed? Those being in favor are Mr. Van Buren, Mr. Harding, Mr. Stewart, and Mr. Hendley. Those opposed? And Mr. Winterton, thank you. And Mr. Sewell. Those opposed, Mr. Sewell and Mr. Connect. Thank you very much. We will now have an implied motion to dismiss. A unanimous consent. Thank you. This meeting's adjourned.